Hey everyone, Disappointed Giant here. Welcome to the fifth and final video in my tier list series, and this video is going to focus on mutations. I'm really excited about this one because I feel like ever since the first tier list I put out, since the melee tier list video, a lot of folks, I feel like every video has at least one comment where someone has been like, hey, can you focus on mutations? Can you do a tier list for mutations? Can you do a video on mutations? And my answer to you right now is, of course, let's do it. You know what? Let's do a couple. So I'm gonna, when I release this video, I will simultaneously have a mutations, kind of like a beginner's guide overview type thing. That's like a video, not just a tier list. So I'm gonna put out these two videos side by side, little sibling videos. So the other video is going to kind of be more of an overview. We're going to talk about re-rolling costs. We're going to talk about when to choose certain mutations, certain ones that I like. We'll talk about the difference between percentage bonuses and flat bonuses, a bunch of stuff. So if you are not too familiar with mutations, while I recommend that you definitely watch this video at some point, I'd say head over to the beginner's guide or whatever I end up calling it. I'll put a link in the description. Check that out and then come back here. And if you've already seen the beginner's guide for mutations and you clicked over here after that, welcome. I hope this is helpful. I'm recording this at the end of May. I mentioned in my Absolute Chaos Brutality video that I put out a few weeks ago, I'm going to be moving soon. I'm going to move in a couple days, so I'm recording this as I'm looking around my room. I got suitcase and clothes and boxes and stuff that's ready to go. But I did want to finish up the series here. Energetically, I feel like this space has been great for me, just in general, but also for doing videos. I did the first 4 tier lists sitting in this same chair at this same desk, and I, for consistency's sake and just kind of for closing the circle, I wanted to record this before I moved, so that way everything would sort of have its home here before I move my home, right? So this is probably you'll know when it's gonna release because you'll be watching it, but I'm planning on getting this out in the middle of June, maybe a little bit earlier, June 10th, 11th, 12th, something like that, but we'll see, right? Life happens, we'll see what happens, but that's my plan. So I'm stoked about this. I feel like some of this might be a little bit, we might get into a lot of numbers with this because I feel like, when you're looking at skills and you're looking at swords and you're looking at throwing knives or whatever, it's expected that, the higher the gear quality and the higher your scroll count, the more damage you're going to do, right? But with mutations, those numbers that each one grants it's important, and we're going to look at, I think there's three different types. We have, we'll have percentage bonuses, right? So for example, like support over here, support starts at 35% and it makes its way up with more tactic scrolls. Something like initiative, on the other hand, has a flat number assigned to it. So the number is going to say, 150 damage, 200 damage, whatever it is. And then the third thing we're going to talk about overall is going to be seconds, right? So looking at like blind faith and killer instinct for, cooldown reduction and other types of effects like that will increase or decrease a certain amount of time that the mutation affects the game. So I feel like more than the others, I'm going to get a little bit more into like the numerical weeds when it comes to these, just because I want to make sure I'm covering my bases, but also, just to give you a little bit more of a visual as to how these things work. And you'll also notice too that there are things that will work off color based on the timing or based on the percentage that it gives. I know I just said support. This starts at a flat 35%, which is good. If you're near a trap or a turret or a deployed skill, as they call it, you'll get 35% extra damage, which is great with tactics as you ramp it up, but also 35% damage if you're running a brutality build with the sinew slicer. That's not bad. Like that's a decent amount of damage there, but we'll get into that stuff more as things go. So let's get into the nitty gritty. So Like my other tier lists, I have a few guidelines. I don't really want to say rules. I get a few guidelines here of how I'm going to be kind of breaking these things down. First and foremost, the audio is going to be recorded in one single take with no script. So I'm just, as I have before, just sitting here, just letting it rip. I don't know how long this video is going to be. As most of you know, either through my other videos or through some of the comments, I can be a bit verbose, so I'm hoping to keep this a little bit more on the relatively trim side, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. I actually was just interacting with a viewer earlier today. I can't remember their name, but we were talking about money management, and they were just like, hey, any questions on money management? I feel like I'm spending a lot on rerolls, and I wrote like a script. I wrote a script, and I was like, I'm sorry, that's huge. So hopefully I won't get too carried away, and we can kind of keep this relatively, smaller than my skills video, which was like 3.5 hours. So we'll see. But anyways, as you can tell from my rambling, single take, no script. I'm not going to be ranking these mutations by what is quote unquote best. I'm going to be ranking them by the frequency in which I use them. So instead of S or S plus or whatever, I have always, sometimes, rarely. Always doesn't mean great. Rarely doesn't mean bad, quote unquote, or whatever. This is just based on my own personal play style. The way that I play the game could be completely different than how you play the game. And stuff that I have up in these two categories, you may never take. Stuff I put closer down here, you might say, wait, I take that brutality run mutation every time I have a brutality run, and he takes it down here, interesting, And I think that's kind of the vibe, right? I don't want to have tier lists that are definitive, right? Here we go. So instead of having something be definitive and saying, yes, use this, only use this mutation, or whenever you take a shield, you have to take this mutation or whatever, because I feel like that really limits things. It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to hear someone say, not usually, but maybe, right? Or I don't, but you should, instead of yes, no. This door is closed, that door is open. I feel like it really limits things, especially when there are so many items, so many things that you can mess around with in Pair and Dead Cells. It's like, try everything, right? I feel like I should get that tattooed, just tattooed somewhere. Try everything. So everything can be useful. There are a couple of mutations that I'm already aware that I'm going to be placing down here. But again, just because I do that, that doesn't mean that they may not be useful for you. It doesn't mean that there is not a situation where you're going to have a specific combo of possibly other mutations and other things where you're going to say, hold on, I'm going to use that. I'm going to try it out and it might work for you, right? I'm just one person sitting in a room talking to a computer, right? Talking to a computer about a video game. So this is not law. This is not word. And finally, I'm going to rank everything alphabetically. And what that means is in each respective tier, frequency tier, left to right is going to be A to Z. If I put something on the left, that doesn't mean it's better than something that's on the right. It's just alphabetized, right? So if, this is perfect. So if you look at your brutality mutations, combo, killer instinct, and vengeance, if those were all in the same line, they would be in this order. And then melee would be here, open wounds would be here, predator would be here, etc. So do not pay attention from the left to right. Just kind of think about, just think of the space that it occupies. And I think that's it. I don't think I have any more housekeeping. I don't. The last thing I want to say is thank you for being here. Thank you for the interest and wanting to watch this. I hope it's helpful. Again, we're probably going to dig into a bunch of numbers and stuff, so it might be a little bit more dry than some of the other tier lists, but hey, it's all good, right? We have a lot of mutations to get through. I think there's 51 or 53. Yeah, so we got 53 mutations to get through. I think it's cool. I like the quality here between 12 for each color, and then we get a little bit more for colorless. So we got some stuff to cover. So let's get things rolling without further ado. So first up, we're going to go through all and I'm going to do these in order of color. So I'm not going to mix the colors up. So we'll go through our brutality. We'll go through our tactics. Then our survival, and finally colorless. You can see a couple of colorless mutations are green. This is like an older tier list. These are now colorless, and we'll get to those when we get there. But each color kind of like has its own vibe or vibes, not counting colorless because those are a little bit more general. But when it comes to like brutality mutations, most of these are melee damage focused, right? There's a couple of ways to buff damage like Vengeance and Tainted Flask, but a lot of these are based on melee attacks. Tactics, you're looking at either ranged attacks or traps. And survival, we're going to look at some shield stuff. We're going to look at vitality for getting health back, and cooldown. I'm just trying to think like kill rhythm. We'll get to kill rhythm when we get to it. And then again, colorless is just going to be kind of a mismatch of stuff with, you know, cooldown and healing, or it's not healing, healing and, you know, extra damage. There's going to be a whole bunch of stuff. So all that said, let's rock and roll with the initial 3 brutality mutations. So whenever you start a new game, whenever you start a new save file, these 3 are going to be unlocked by default. And there's actually 3 for each, and we're going to do those in order. The first one here is that sigh was not like an exasperated sigh. I'm just looking at this. I'm like, man, these are some good mutations. The first one we're going to get to is combo. So combo is a mutation that gives you a counter on a screen. It's like a hit counter up on the top corner. The more times that you hit an enemy with a melee attack, the higher that number goes. And right underneath it, you'll see a percentage, and that is how much each hit is going to increase in damage. So if we take a look here, combo, it will, there you go. So at 1 scroll does an extra 2.1% damage. Each hit increases that much. At 5 scrolls, it's 2.5%. 30 scrolls is 5%. This mutation is, and another thing too, is some mutations are going to be good for biomes and some are going to be good for bosses. And there are some like combo that are good for both. And I'll call these all out as we get through them. So combo is, in my opinion, I feel like it's very useful. You know, most brutality items tend to be a little bit more on like the faster, medium to medium fast side. You know, thinking of stuff, anything, right? Balance blade, oiled sword, blood sword. You know, those things are a little bit quicker than something like the broadsword, right? So you may notice that as you use brutality melee items, this percentage, or excuse me, the combo number that you have is going to grow pretty quickly. You know, I have some videos where I'm using like the Morning Star, where I end up getting up to like 50, 45, 50, 60 hits. It's pretty wild. But it's great because, you know, that damage continues to build up, and the time, like the grace period that you have between hits is 2.5 seconds. So what that means is if you hit an enemy 5 times over here and you get your number 5 on the combo meter, you have 2.5 seconds to then hit another enemy to keep that combo going. So think of, I don't know, like Street Fighter, right? Think of like a Street Fighter Third Strike or whatever, where you're playing a game and you can see the combo number up in the top. It's very similar to that. Personally, I take this a lot. Like I mentioned, this is good in biomes and against bosses. This thing is great for more stationary bosses. So think of something like Mamatic, think of something like the Giant. It's also great in biomes where there's enemies everywhere, right? So Stilt Village, Graveyard, like where you're going to be able to get 20, 30, 40 hits. It's a really good choice, in my opinion, for pretty much any situation. There are some heavier items that kind of cross over into brutality. So like Flint and Flawless and Vampire Killer too, I guess you could say. So with those, the combo meter is not going to increase as much, right? Because it's based on how many hits, not how much damage you do it. The number that increases is based on how many hits. So you're going to get more hits per few seconds with an oiled sword than you are going to be with the flint or with the flawless or something. But on the other side of that, the higher damage items are going to benefit more from a higher damage bonus, right? So 3% on 100 damage is, you know, you get an extra 3 damage or whatever it is. But if it was 1,000 damage, you're going to be getting an extra 30 damage. So it's like the higher damage that you're doing, the more important these multipliers are. One of the things that I've done is I think that's called power stance, where you take 2 main items in your 2 main slots. So I mentioned the Morning Star. So what you could do is take the Morning Star in one hand and then use that to quickly get your combo meter up to 25, 20, 30, or whatever it is. And then in your other hand, if you have a flint, if you have a flawless, if you have a colorless, seismic strike, whatever it might be, you can then benefit from an extra large damage bonus because the quicker weapon got the combo number up faster, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of like cool little things that you can do with this. Interesting tech. Previously, this mutation was not good for bosses. They buffed it or changed it. I think it might have been 3.3 or 3.4. Yeah, they reworked it in 3.4. So what used to happen is after you killed an enemy, you would just get a flat DPS bonus for 8 seconds. So it was pretty much useless in boss fights, and even in biomes, it wasn't like super interactive. You just kill an enemy and then you just do more damage, right? So I feel like they did a really good job. Evaulation did a great job kind of taking this, changing it around, leaning into the fighting game style of things and making it more accessible for pretty much at any point in the game. So Killer Instinct is next, and speaking of combos in fighting games, there was an old game called Killer Instinct for Super Nintendo and arcade that I used to play all the time when I was younger, and I think it's funny that we're going right from combo into Killer Instinct. So Killer Instinct is the first of our cooldown mutations, and what this does is that it will decrease your skill cooldown by a certain amount of time whenever you kill an enemy with a melee strike, or excuse me, a melee attack. So as you saw with combo, that bonus was a percentage bonus. Like I mentioned, there was a few different types. Killer Instinct has time-based bonus. So the higher your scroll count as we go left to right here, the more cooldown you're going to get from the mutation. So as you can see early on, may not be super useful, you know, if you take this after the prisoner's quarters, you get 3 scrolls, you know, getting an extra half a second on cooldown may not be that useful. But if you end up taking this later, you know, when you're getting towards 50 or 20 scrolls, 2 seconds of cooldowns, nothing to sneeze at. 2.5 seconds, the same thing. So I feel like this is a mutation that benefits with higher scroll counts. Personally, I take this sometimes because every once in a while, you know, I mean, with Brutality, as I was mentioning, you're looking at more of these these fast to medium fast melee kind of attacks or melee items generally. And while I like to lean into that, there are some skills that have a pretty large cooldown. I think like Knife Dance, I think is like 16 seconds. Corrosive Cloud, I think, is 16 seconds. Powerful Grenade's 13. So having something like this, if you have a skill heavy build that has higher cooldown like that, it can be helpful. But again, even though I do tend to take this sometimes, not necessarily recommended earlier in the run, because I feel like the difference is negligible. You know, you might be better off with something like combo or something like another mutation that we're gonna talk about in a bit. But this definitely has its merits. Get those skill cooldowns, you know. And it's cool too because it was Motion Twin did this. This was when Motion Twin was still building and you know, planning for Dead Cells. In version 1.1, they changed all the passive cooldowns to active cooldowns. So each color has its own cooldown mechanic that's tied to a mutation that plays into the style of gameplay, which I think is so cool. I think it's so cool to have that kind of cooldown. So pretty sweet. So yeah, I'll take this sometimes. I dig it. The third quote-unquote free mutation that we're going to get with Brutality here is Vengeance. I feel like I've talked about Vengeance a lot in a bunch of different ways. Like my very first video was a poorly mathed and poorly planned out video about how good Vengeance and Face Flask are together. And ever since then, I've been heavy on the Vengeance train. So I take this thing all the time. And this is we're gonna look at a flat. Oh, so this is actually perfect. So what we're looking at here, we're gonna look at a flat damage bonus here now. All right. So with one scroll in Brutality, Vengeance is going to give you an extra 60% damage for 8 seconds after you take damage. But it also gives you 30% of damage reduction for 3 seconds. So no matter how many Brutality scrolls you have, this is not going to change. You could take this with 1,000 Brutality scrolls and you're still only going to take 30% less damage for 3 seconds. What increases is the amount of extra damage that you do. So the way that I like to use Vengeance is I mentioned Face Flask. I love Face Flask. It's a skill that you're going to get. It's from the Everybody's Here update volume 1. I think you're going to get it probably like 9 or 10 runs into a fresh save file from a lore room in the prisoners' quarters. And what it does is you activate it and it will do small damage to you. It does like 6 or 7 damage to you or something like that. Has affixes. But when you pair it with Vengeance, it will allow you to activate the damage reduction, but more importantly, activate the increase in damage output that you have for a very low cost. Often you're going to pair, like I said, it will have affixes. So you might get like Poison Cloud, you might get Burns the Ground when you use it. So you're also going to have potential for synergy. I talked about this a lot in obviously that Face Flask video, and I also talked about it in my, I think I went into it in my mid-game tutorial video, and of course I talked about it in my skills video. So if you're more interested in hearing about Face Flask, I recommend checking out the skills tier list, so that way I don't hog up too much of this video talking about how much I love Face Flask. Super good, but it pairs well with this. Face Flask has a 10-second cooldown, and Vengeance has a damage bonus for 8 seconds. So that means that in general, if you're using Face Flask every time it cools down, you have an 80% uptime of having extra damage, which is crazy. I feel like if you have an extra mutation slot and you have room in your build for Face Flask, just take it. Take Face Flask, take Vengeance, and watch your damage go up, especially against bosses and stuff like that. I think it's fantastic. This is also the first mutation that we're going to talk about that I feel is worth taking off color. And the two reasons for that is, like I mentioned, doesn't matter how many scrolls you have in Brutality, it's always going to do 30% damage reduction for 3 seconds. So you can take this with any build, any color, if you're looking for some DR, but also 60 seconds of bonus, 60% bonus damage is a big number. That's more than half. So while you can take it with Face Flask, this is also a really good beginner's mutation, in my opinion. If you're just starting the game and you're finding that Hand of the King's, you're getting rocked by Hand of the King, or enemies are hitting harder than you'd want, even if you're taking a tactics build or survival build or whatever, you can take Vengeance because it's going to give you a little bit of a buffer between hits. So that way you'll take a little bit less damage, extend the run. And then it's almost like those 8 seconds of extra damage that you're doing may end up turning the tides, right? It may tip the scales a little bit more in your favor. So it's so useful. Like I just mentioned, you can use it more for high level play with Face Flask. You can use it on your very first run as a brand new player, and you're going to get benefit from it. So I feel like Vengeance has a lot of use cases for it, and I'm a big fan. If you haven't tried it, if you are struggling in the game with taking damage and stuff like that, give it a shot. You may find that it's gonna smooth some things out for you. So this here is the melee mutation, and the way that melee works is with every sorry, there's an airplane going over. With every melee hit, an enemy will get slowed, and slow stacks. So I think it's is it 0.8 or 0.4 seconds? Yeah. So every melee attack is going to slow an enemy with one brutality scroll. It's going to slow them for 0.4 seconds, and then it caps at 1.6. So you're basically looking at half a second slow or a second and a half of slow. I find that this is very helpful in a bunch of different situations. So I'm thinking, like, think of the slasher in the ossuary or in the prison depths, you know, the dudes with the skeletons with the hoods that take those huge swings at you. Using melee, if you hit him a couple times in let's say you have one stat in brutality, right? You hit him a couple times, that's going to give you a little less than a second of slowdown. That's just enough to roll through them as they're getting ready to swing, so you can get behind them and do some extra damage. You may find that this is going to be something that you can pair with an affix on your item. If you get bonus damage to slowed targets, instantly get, I think it's 30%. You can instantly get 30% bonus on it. I feel like I feel like it has a lot of potential. You can pair it with Frostbite, which is a mutation that does damage to slowed targets, like does a little bit of DOT. So there's a lot of potential for it. I do not love melee when it comes to boss fights. I've mentioned this in a couple other videos, but any sort of interruption or slowing of boss patterns or boss attacks can throw me off my rhythm. It's like, you know, it's almost like when you're playing a song and like the song has like a specific beat. When the beat slows and you're playing your guitar or you're playing bass or whatever, it can throw you off. And I feel like that happens to me when I'm fighting a boss, and if I forget to re-roll or if I have melee on or something like that. So I don't love it for boss fights, but I do enjoy it for biomes, especially when you pair it with some of the other mutations that we're going to get into in a little bit. So I take this sometimes, and like I said, it's just a nice little utility mutation. Drops from the concierge on the fifth kill concierge. So you'll probably get this relatively early. And yeah, you know, it works with faster weapons better, I feel like, than slower weapons. But in general, you know, a little slow can go a long way. So here we have Open Wounds. So Open Wounds is a mutation that gives any melee item that you have, it allows it to do bleeding. Open Wounds is funky. So first off, I take this sometimes. In general, having bleed is great. If you have an item that has plus 60% to bleeding, you can instantly get some extra damage, so it works that way. And I also feel like a lot of folks, or I've seen a lot of folks who are, you know, trying to pick mutations. If they have 2 out of 3, they might just say, I'll take Open Wounds. You know, take Open Wounds for whatever. So it's really strong. You know, I feel like other people would put it up here, but just my own personal play style, I don't lean into it as much, but I find it to be a very strong and helpful mutation. What's funky about Open Wounds is that it scales in a way that you would not normally expect. Excuse me. So it scales with the scroll count of the item that is applying the bleeding. So here's the number of stats, and this is not the number of brutality scrolls. This is the number of stats in whatever melee weapon you're using. So if you have an oven axe and you're running survival and you have 20 survival scrolls, your oven axe with Open Wounds will do 256 DPS of bleed. It also scales up with the gear level of the item, so that way higher gear level is gonna have it scale more. It's really interesting. So I think it says it. Yeah. So basically, even though this is a brutality mutation, it functions as a colorless mutation. So try to think of that moving forward. If you happen to be playing a non-brutality build and you need bleed, or you just want some extra synergy for your items, think about that, right? You can take this with any color, even though it is brutality. The way that bleeding works, I've mentioned this before, but in case you're not familiar, bleeding works as very similar to like a FromSoft game where you will stack bleed, and after five bleed stacks, it will pop into a large amount of damage. You'll see some blood splatter on the wall behind the enemy. So the goal with bleeding is to get as many stacks as quickly as possible and then continually reapply those stacks. That's why I love Cleaver and Sinew Slicer together. You could take open wounds with the Blood Sword. You could take an open wounds with the legendary Blood Sword, which would give you 3 stacks of bleed with every hit. It can get wild. It can get messy very quickly. But again, does not need to be a brutality melee item. If you have a tactics build with tactics melee, survival build with melee, you could also take open wounds and you're not going to lose out here. So, but again, I take it sometimes, although, as I mentioned, it is in my opinion, it's a very powerful mutation that you can roll with. So these 3, I'm going to pop up together. So this is Predator, which gives you invincibility on a kill. This is Initiative, which does extra damage on the first melee hit of an enemy, and this is Scheme, which does extra damage after you use a skill. I'm gonna look up the patch notes. I think this was introduced in maybe version 15. So they wanted to do a Assassin's build where basically they would have a high risk, high reward glass cannon kind of build. Maybe it was 14. Yep, here we go. So and the reason why I'm bringing this up is these used to be tactics mutations. So even though they're brutality now and they fit very well within the playstyle, the initial purpose was to make melee purple an unstoppable killing machine, which is pretty sweet. So here we go. Assassin's build, glass cannon, high damage, great mobility, low tankiness, right? I think I might actually have... Do I have some videos? I think I do. One of these... Nope. I think it's this one. Yeah, here we go. So, yep. So you can see this used to be tactics, right? So here I am in a build. Oh my God, this was August of 2020 almost. Oh my God, it was almost 4 years ago. But I got purple symmetrical lance, I got initiative, I got predator, and I got scheme, and I'm just rolling with it, rolling with that melee tactics. I don't know how much health do I have? Probably not a lot. If I'm playing tactics, yeah, look at that, 1300 health. That is minimal, right? So anyways, that's the history lesson, is that these used to be purple to give tactics melee kind of like a leg up, right? At some point, they ended up moving everything over to brutality. I can't remember when it was. It might have been 2.4, 2.1. So in update 2.1, they changed everything from tactics to brutality. So as I mentioned, these mutations fit right at home since they are all melee based. In doing so, Evil Empire removed some of the risk, right? That high risk, high reward, because you're going to have more HP with a brutality build. And since it's built around, the color is built around melee, like you're not, so it's like it went from high risk, high reward to low risk, high reward, right? So the first of these is Predator. As I mentioned, every kill that you have on an enemy will grant you invisibility. At the one stat, it starts at 1 second. And then at 21, it caps at 2.8 seconds. So I take Predator all the time. Not a great boss mutation for obvious reasons, but in biomes, this thing is fantastic. It's wild. At higher scroll levels, it's wild. And in my opinion, the best way to use Predator is to have an item that can kill an enemy in one hit, right? So the aforementioned Flawless or Flint. I love Predator with Valmont's Whip. There's a lot of cool weapons that you can use, and the reason why I like to take it with the heavier weapon is because if you attack while you're invisible, it will remove the effect. So what happens, you kill an enemy, you become invisible for between 1 and about 3 seconds. And what happens is that will de-aggro the enemies that are chasing you or the enemy that's attacking you. If you have a lighter item, like an oiled sword or a spiked sword or something, and you swing that sword and the enemy doesn't get killed from it, it will re-engage you. So it's not super hard to work around, but it's just something to keep in mind, where if you do swing your melee item and you attack, or if you slam down, or if you roll through a door, it's going to break your invisibility. In general, I find this to be an incredibly strong mutation. Again, you can take this in something like the Forgotten Sepulcher, take it in the graveyard, take it in the infested shipwreck, and you're just going to be breezing through. You're going to be breezing right through, especially in the later game biomes where you're going to be pulling, higher. 20 scrolls is kind of like in my opinion, it's probably like close the end of a 0 BC run. But if you're playing 2, 3, 4 BC, you're going to hit 20, as you're coming into the biome after the first boss, most likely. So you're going to get max usage out of this pretty easily. Again, super strong, very low risk. Predator is fantastic. The second of the 3 previous tactic mutations is initiative. And I think initiative is our first flat damage. It is. Initiative is our first flat damage bonus mutation. So we've talked about time, right? We talked about time with Predator and Killer Instinct. We talked about percentage with combo and melee, right? But here we're looking at a flat damage bonus that is applied based on however many scrolls that you have. So initiative is a mutation that will give you extra damage for the first attack against any enemy. So if you were to pair this with Predator, you're going to get that extra bump of damage like I mentioned. So that way, instead of killing an enemy in 2 hits, you may kill it in 1, which will then allow you to continue your invisibility streak as you roll through the level. The flat damage here is not great. I'll just say it. As far as the numbers go, it's not great. Objectively speaking, initiative is not a super strong mutation. Subjectively speaking, I like it. As you saw in that video, I used to roll tactics melee back in the day with these things, and I've grown accustomed to it. Instead of trying to min-max everything, right? Trying to pick the best mutation every single time. And it's just like, I just like initiative. Sometimes you just use something even though it may not be the quote unquote best, right? If you like Seda Stiletto, keep using it, even though there are other ways to get better damage. If you like Vengeance and Spite Sword, then do that. Whatever floats your boat. And for me, this is something that I really enjoy. But again, flat damage is not the best here. These numbers are fairly low values, but also you don't want to take this off color because these aren't percentage based, right? So if this was 10%, 15%, 16% or whatever, it may be worth taking off color. But if you have 5 brutality scrolls in your survival build, each first hit is going to do 175 damage, which is, it's pennies, it's nothing. So definitely do not take this off color. And again, I know a lot of folks aren't crazy about it because of that, the low damage, but personally, it's just something I enjoy. I like the icon. I like the synergy with Predator. It kind of like beefs your damage up a bit. So I do take it sometimes. And again, this is not if you do choose to take this on a brutality build, not a great boss item. The last of the 3 is Scheme. And what Scheme does is it will give you a flat damage bonus after using a skill. Any skill, right? So we're talking Powerful Grenade, Infantry Grenade, Corrosive Cloud, Cleaver, whatever rolls your boat. Any of those secondary skills are going to allow your next melee attack to do an extra flat damage. For me, Scheme has very limited use, and part of that is because cooldowns, like I was mentioning earlier, are generally on the higher side, right? So Oil Grenade has 10 seconds cooldown. That's relatively relatively low. I think Fire Grenade is 10 or 12. Powerful Grenade's 13. So that means that if you take this with the Powerful Grenade, every 13 seconds, you're going to get an extra 704 damage if you have 10 scrolls. It's not a lot, right? However, there are two items, and I'm going to open up gear in a new window. The two items that are definitely worth taking Scheme for are Grappling Hook and Phaser. Both of these skills activate pretty much immediately. They grant their own damage bonuses, right? So Grappling Hook gives you a flat 40% damage. Phaser gives you a plus 70 damage. But their cooldowns are super low, right? The cooldown here is 3 seconds for Grappling Hook. Phaser's 2 seconds. So you're going to be able to get some extra usage out of that. I like it mostly with Grappling Hook, just because you're putting, extra plus 40, extra plus flat here. But aside from those, so if we're looking, let's look at some other gear. Yeah, so looking at all the red stuff here, Brutality, 16, 16, 30. These are the ones we just talked about, 20 seconds, 12 seconds. There's a lot of stuff. Light Speed's 10 seconds, Smoke Bomb 16 seconds. I feel like the cooldown for these things are generally too high for a scheme to be used effectively. But Phaser or Grappling Hook, I think it might be worth it. All that said, I feel like I'm going to say rarely on this one, because I don't use Grappling Hook all the time. And it's just not something I put in my builds all the time, and it's like a very specific thing. But on occasion, I will use Scheme. So again, this is not a reflection on its utility or its skill or its numbers or whatever. It's just personally, like, because of my own play style and because of the way that I look at damage numbers, I will use this with Grappling Hook or Phaser, but generally not much else. So I will rarely take it. The next two mutations are Adrenalin, which will grant you healing on after you dodge an attack for 5 seconds. You have your melee attacks will heal you. And then this is Frenzy, and Frenzy will heal you with every melee attack when you have a speed buff. So when we were talking about flat damage, we're talking about percentages. As you can see, there's a lot of zeros here. There are a lot of zeros before the actual numbers in that percentage, right? So it's a tenth. Oh my God, what is that? A thousandth of a percentage? Is that what we're looking at here, right? Tenth, yeah, it's a thousandth of a percentage, 2,000ths of a percentage, or whatever. So after you dodge for 5 seconds, you'll be able to heal. The calculation uses the base damage of the hit of the attack. So every item has its own base damage. So again, let's go back into, I already have gear open up here. Sorry about that. Let's just check out a couple of melee items really quickly. Here we go. So the base DPS, as you can see, Assassin's Dagger base DPS 134, Blood Sword's 122, Spite Sword's 144. So since this is calculated with the base damage, if you were to heal, if you were to have Adrenalin active and you were to use these items, Spite Sword would heal more than the Assassin's Dagger. Assassin's Dagger would heal more than Blood Sword. Blood Sword would heal more than the Sadist Stiletto, right? For me, these numbers are way too small. And just my own personal play style, the way that when I have tried to use Adrenalin and by extension Frenzy, when I see the little healing icon above my head, I want to heal. So what happens is I end up engaging with enemies a little bit more recklessly to try to get my healing back, try to get my health back, which means I take more damage. So this could be a me thing. Like I said, some folks out there might really enjoy taking this. I think there are some other better choices, even if you're running Brutality, if you need some extra healing, that we'll get into as time goes on. So personally for me, I do not take Adrenalin often. And I also do not take Frenzy often. And as you'll see with Frenzy, as I mentioned, this one heals a player when there's an active speed buff. And then same thing, damage taken into account is the base stat of weapons without bonuses from level, quality, or scrolls. So the same thing that we were just looking at here, these base numbers are what it's going to calculate with. As you can see here, again, we have a decimal point and then 2 zeros and then a 1. Okay. While you can, yeah, here we go. I was gonna say, while you can use this with velocity, you might get some extra time out of your speed bonus, which means you may get some extra healing back. For me personally, there's better options. And again, I happen to try to maximize the healing that I get, and that puts me on I put myself into situations where I end up getting rocked because of it. So maybe I'm just sloppy, right? Maybe you use Frenzy with velocity and you're like, hey, this thing rips, it gets my HP back up. In which case, awesome. In which case, tell me your secrets and show me the way so that way I can use it more. But as is, I rarely take Frenzy. I think Frenzy would be sick if it was like an item, right? So think of something like liposuction, like that thing that drops that gives you an extra cell with every enemy you kill for 60 seconds. If Frenzy was an item that gave you a speed boost for 60 seconds or just allowed you to heal for 60 seconds as you did it, like, I think that would be really cool, because it wouldn't take up a spot. It would just be like a cool bonus that you could kind of stumble into if it drops. So, but as is, both Adrenalin and Frenzy are not mutations that I take often. And I have a feeling, even though we're not done with Brutality yet, I have a feeling that this general curve may be what we see as things go on. I feel like there's going to be a little bit more spread between the top, the middle, and the bottom as far as frequency goes. I think my shields list was pretty even. I feel like most of my other tier lists had like a decent spread, but I think this might not be spread as much. But only time will tell as we continue on with Tainted Flask. So, Tainted Flask is wild. I think the mechanics behind Tainted Flask are so cool. When you use a health flask, you have a percentage base damage for 20 seconds. And 20 seconds is kind of a long time, right? So if you think about, like, Vengeance is 8 seconds, right? This will last 2.5 times as long as Vengeance does. And the next time you're in a boss fight, think, like, count to 20 or look at the clock and look for 20 seconds. Like, that's a long time. The other side of this, and what makes it sick, is that if you have an empty flask, it will recharge after killing elite enemies, and it also puts an extra elite in every biome, so that way you can meet this number more quickly, which is so cool. They buff this in 3-4. So this is a clean cut buff, another clean cut buff. It used to be where they would only refill it if the flask was completely empty, but now it happens if there's only one empty flask charge. So this is something that you can get use out of more frequently, more often. And they also buffed it from 12 to 20 seconds, which is great. This right here, this is how you look at an item, and this is how you buff it to make it viable without making it so overpowered that it completely takes over the game. The base amount of damage that you're going to get for that 20 seconds is 20%. And clearly, the more stats you have, the higher it goes. If we're talking 4 to 5 BC towards the end of the game, you're going to be in this general area, which means that every time you use a flask, which, let's face it, is probably going to be more likely on higher difficulties towards the end of the game, you're going to be getting these extra almost double damage, which is for 20 seconds, which is super sick. The more brutality scrolls that you have, the less elites it's going to take for you to refill that flask. So again, like I was mentioning with Killer Instinct, the numbers at early or low stat counts, I should say, low scroll counts, are not super impressive. But as it goes on, this is a great mid to late game mutation. Especially, like I said, you're probably gonna be burning a flask here and there. Pop this in after the first boss, you're going to get your flasks back, and you're also going to have that nice damage boost, because at that point you're probably going to be rolling somewhere between 60 and 70% extra damage if you happen to use a flask. I take this often. It's not something I know you want to go up there. You belong down here though. I do not take it all the time, because there's other things up here that I would fill a slot with. And as we'll see later, there are some other colorless mutations that I prefer to take, or mutations I'll take off color a lot. So generally there's a better fit for it. But if I am down flask charges and I don't have a lot of money, if I am looking to get some extra damage in a boss fight, I will take this with me, knowing that I can recharge my flask if I have biomes coming up with more elites in it. And the other side of this too is, every elite that spawns, when you kill it, it will drop, generally it will drop a necklace, but it may also drop some gear, which is going to be higher quality than what's normally found in the level. I think it might be the same quality, as what's in the shop, or yeah, exactly. So it's going to be the same quality as what you find in the shop, which means that you can recycle it to get some good money. So even though this mutation's great, the extra elite, a very niche bonus is that you're also going to get potential for a better amulet, and you're also going to get potential for more money too. So really powerful, but it's one of those things that I feel like kind of flies under the radar a bit for some folks, because there are things that are more catchy, a little bit more flashy to take. So if you haven't tried Tainted Flask, I recommend it. Again, take it, even if you're a little low on flasks, take it with you into biomes, be able to recharge, and take it into a boss fight. Chug a flask, count your 20 seconds and see how that works for you. And again, the damage bonus is applied to everything. So it's not just your melee attacks, it's not just your skills. It'll bump up all of your damage for 20 seconds. The last mutation for brutality is the backpack mutation. And I was just checking. I want to put all the backpack mutations at the end of each respective section. So this is Porcupack. And the way that Porcupack works is you can put a melee item in your backpack, and when you roll through an enemy, you will do 75% base damage of that item. I really enjoy using Porcupack for a few specific reasons. I think I may have mentioned this in my melee tier video. For just some reason, I really like taking this with Queen's Rapier. I like rolling through an enemy, getting the damage, and then seeing the reality slice hit the enemy as I'm rolling through. It's not like a super smart high level gameplay thing. It's just something I enjoy. Similar like how I just like to take initiative sometimes. It's just something cool I like to do sometimes. But the main way that I use Porcupack is for synergies. So what I like to do is I like to put a torch in the backpack, use Porcupack, and then roll through enemies to be able to get fire on them for either Vampire Killer or Oiled Sword. Things like that, I really enjoy. You could also take this with Dagger of Prophet, which is the brutality item that will give you crits for 4 seconds after you pick up gold. So if you throw the Gold Digger item in your backpack, you can roll through enemies. It's going to do, even if you take it off color, it's not going to do a lot of damage, but you're trying to get that gold so you can then get the crits on the Dagger Prophet, which I think is pretty cool. And the other thing that you can use it with is if you find an item that has extra damage affixes, right? So you're looking at the lifesteal here, 1% healed, double damage taken, or double damage or quad damage. You get the positives of that and you do not get the negatives. So if you were to put a quad damage melee item in your backpack and you take Porcupack, you are not going to take quad damage. You are going to deal quad damage times whatever the multiplier is for your scroll count, but you're not going to take that extra damage. It's also a smart move to do if you pop that lifesteal, you know, the one that has like I think it's got like a tear of blood or something like that over it. So that way, every time you roll through an enemy, every 3 seconds, you're going to get 1% of your life back, right? Compare that to the numbers from Frenzy and from Adrenalin that require more active participation in getting that healing back. This is, in my opinion, this is a smarter move. Instead of taking Adrenalin, instead of taking Frenzy, if you find a lifesteal item, pop it in the backpack, take Porcupack. Generally, you're going to be rolling a lot because that's how you get your iframes. That's how you dodge damage. That's how you avoid damage and dodge through enemies. So you're going to find that this may be helpful for you. I take it sometimes. P for Porcupack. I take it sometimes. Again, you know, I love it with Queen's Rapier. I love it with Synergy. I love popping. Sometimes you just find like a random item that you just want to pop in there. Super hilarious if you get a legendary Spartan sandals and you put it in your backpack with Porcupack. It's going to be funny because enemies, whenever you roll into an enemy, it's going to fly like 2/3 of the way. You're going to hit the enemy. It's going to fly like 2/3 of the way across the screen. I really enjoy doing that too. And that's just like a fun little silly thing, but there are a lot of cool utilities here. And again, the damage percentage is, it's respectable, right? So even at 1 scroll, you're getting 75% damage just for rolling, which is not bad, right? And like I mentioned before, you know, when you're looking at higher BC, higher scroll count, you're going to be getting the full damage from it just from rolling through. So, and again, this isn't like a huge differential, right? We're not talking like 25% at 1 scroll and then 99% at 25 scrolls. Like it starts really high. So this is something that I think you could also take off color if you happen to be running a survival build. Another great synergy. If you have a survival build, you can put Seismic Strike in the backpack, which roots enemies, roll through an enemy and then have the Maw of the Deep or Nutcracker or Baseball Bat as your primary item, so that way you can get crits on rooted enemies. So I think there's a lot of utility here. I do kind of think you have to kind of like, you can't see me, I'm rolling my thumbs and my fingers together like I'm like taking apart a pair of glasses. You really got to kind of like roll in there. Like you got to really think deeply about what affixes do you have, what items are popping up. Is there a way that you could utilize Porcupack to get extra damage? Right? You might put a blood sword in your backpack and then have a main item that has 60% to bleed. Like there's so many different things you can do. So I feel like there's a lot of utility here. And again, the percentage bonus here is nice, even when you take it off color. So if you haven't messed with this, I recommend it. I'm going to recommend, spoiler alert, I'm going to recommend trying all of the backpack mutations. I think Evil Empire did a fantastic job implementing new ways to play that are respective of each color style, right? So this is the melee one since we're Brutality. So, and that's the end. That's not the of the video. That's the end of Brutality. So we got our 12 mutations there. And we're going to keep on. Yeah, I don't need to go back. We're good. So next up, we're going to go through the tactics mutations. And like I did earlier, we're going to put these in order of the ones that are available by default first. Hunter's Instinct is your cooldown reduction mutation. So similar to how Killer Instinct reduced cooldown with melee attacks, the Brutality vibe, Hunter's Instinct reduces skill cooldown with ranged attacks, which can be really helpful in biomes. I personally will take this often. I just enjoy having the ability to have things like Knife Dance or Lightning Rods or Light Speed or whatever it is. I like having like a fast style of tactics gameplay, and generally you're going to be using a ranged item as your main weapon in tactics, so it's easier to get the cooldowns. I think it starts at like 1.1. seconds. What are we looking at here? Oh no, it starts way low. I was completely off. So just like Killer Instinct, earlier on, you're not going to get much of a return on investment here. Again, maybe towards or after the first boss, you're going to start to see a more noticeable cooldown reduction. But in general, I really do enjoy this. I love the icon. I love how it's like a little clock on top of the bow. And I think Killer Instinct has that there too. And so does Blind Faith. They all got the same little clock on there. Yeah, not much to say about it other than the fact that I enjoy this. And I feel like it's super helpful in a tactics build when you have skills that do have a higher cooldown. If you happen to be using Firebrands and Vampire Killer with the tactics build, probably not worth taking Hunter's Instinct, but because you're gonna be using more melee, or if you have skills that you're not leaning into. But if you do have a skill heavy, high cooldown tactics build, Hunter's Instinct is a solid choice. The second of the 3 free mutations is support. I take support all the time. I was just gonna say it rips, and I looked at the word ripper. So support gives you a damage bonus when you're close to a deployable skill. So Wolf Trap, Sinew Slicer, Cleaver, whatever. Whenever you're within, I think it's 9 tiles. Yeah, whenever you're within 9 tiles to a skill that's on the ground, you're gonna get an extra damage bonus. 35% to start off with is not bad. I think this is another use case argument to take off color. If you happen to be running a brutality build and you have 5 scrolls in tactics and you have a cleaver or a sinew slicer with red, extra 37% is not bad, especially since you're getting extra DPS from bleeding and whatever, right? Whatever sort of status effects you might be getting from those turrets. I take this, like I just said, I take it all the time. Clearly on tactics, the higher your scroll count, the better. You're going to be getting higher scroll levels, higher BCs. You're going to be getting like 50% damage just by standing close to a turret. It's wild. And as you folks may know, turrets in general are fairly strong. So when you're buffing all of the damage as a player, but then you're also buffing the damage of the turret just by being close to it, like that can get pretty powerful pretty quickly. Like take this thing with the Tesla coil and watch it. Just watch how quickly enemies will shred. This is another biome that I feel like is useful both in boss fights and in biomes. A mutation that's useful in boss fights and biomes. I generally tend to lean on this. Like I said, I take it all the time. I'll take it in a biome, but I find that I pay more attention to it in boss fights because that's where I'm really trying to pump out damage as quickly as possible so I can get that flawless, get that kill door, get that legendary, whatever it might be. But in biomes, this thing works great too. So super utility, highly recommended. Again, this is one you've probably, if you've played tactics and you've probably already taken this just because it's one of the original choices, but very, very strong. And they buffed it. Was it 3-2? Yeah. So they buffed it recently too. So clean cut, they buffed the base damage from 10% to 35%. So right off the bat, this moved from on color to off color. Because I feel like that extra 25% gives it the justification to pretty much take it with any build. What they did was that they reduced the scaling of it on the other end of it. So that's not that big of a deal, right? So basically, as you can see, each stat you get is going to increase it from 36 to 0.5%. It's going to add that 0.5% every time instead of a whole percent. But because the base damage is higher when it got buffed, like I feel like it's not even worth talking about the decrease in scroll scaling, because it's whatever the math is, it would take 25 scrolls to get it from 10% to 35%, and it's just not, you're not missing out much. So this thing's, yeah, grab it. Long story short, just take it. The third and final free mutation for tactics is Tranquility. And the way that Tranquility works is it will give you extra damage. It's a 25% base if there are no enemies nearby. So I like Tranquility. I take it a lot. I don't take it as much as support just because, sometimes as you're rolling through biomes, enemies will be quicker, or they'll be closer to you. Super helpful because this is all damage, right? So damage over time. There's the build, the tactics build where you have Wings of the Crow and throwing knives and all this stuff that you're going to be doing a ton of damage over time, and you use Wings of the Crow to get away from enemies quickly so that way you can proc the Tranquility bonus. I think that's really super strong. But in general, I find that, in biomes, I'm kind of close to a lot of enemies just based on my own play style. But I do love taking this into against the Concierge. I really enjoy taking this with the Marksman bow, which will give you, I think the crit damage on Marksman bow is 6 times, right? Where are we? Marksman. Yeah, the crit damage is basically 6 times. So you're going to get 6 times your base damage with Marksman bow plus the additional, 25, 30, 50%, whatever it might be. Specifically, when it comes to bosses, I love Tranquility against the Concierge. He's slow. You can throw a wolf trap down and then go to the other side of the arena, use your Marksman bow, use your quick bow, use your whatever, right? Use your Nerves of Steel, get some extra damage as he's kind of lumbering around. It's also kind of cool to pair Tranquility with support, put these two together. Because like I mentioned, with Tranquility, you have 9 tiles. And what I should have said is, a tile, the space of a tile is considered, think of when you have a secret on the ground and you ground slam it and a piece of food comes out or a jewel comes out or whatever. That space where the hole is, that's 1 tile. So imagine 9 of those together. That's how much you have to be close to a turret to get support to proc. With Tranquility, enemies only need to be further than 5 tiles. So if you were to put those two together, take that example of Concierge I just used, right? Throw a wolf trap down in front of him and then back up far enough so that way Tranquility procs, so you're further than 5 tiles from him, but you are closer than 9 tiles. Whoops. You're closer than 9 tiles from support. So what that means is that you're going to end up getting both the damage, the damage increase from support and the damage increase from Tranquility. So I know that's a really specific use case, but in general, I really enjoy that. And you may find that there are other things you can do that with too, right? You might be able to slowly make your way through the High Peak Castle or Fractured Shrines and pick enemies off from far and get your Tranquility bonus. Really strong, really strong. On the other side of it is Point Blank. So Point Blank is legitimately the exact opposite of Tranquility. So where Tranquility gives you bonus from further away, Point Blank will give you a bonus from up close. The bonus for that, I believe, is 30 base. Yeah, so it starts at 30%. And I love I love the way that this is worded. Close ranged attacks will do a extra base bonus damage, which I think is really funny. I take Point Blank all the time. I take it all the time. I will take it with Infantry Bow. I feel like that is an obvious combination because Infantry Bow will crit close range. But it's also just good to have because, like I mentioned, you're my own play style, I do tend to roll through enemies a lot. I kind of have, sometimes I can get haphazard. So having something that's going to do extra damage, even whether it's Infantry Bow or multi-nox bow or even the Marksman bow, whatever it is, having that extra damage from close enemies is helpful. For me, this can also justify taking it off color because 30% is not a small bonus. It is not a flat damage bonus, not a number bonus. So that way the percentage is going to be helpful. And this buffs everything that is considered a ranged attack. So if we're thinking off color, the Reality Slice from the Queen's Rapier is considered a ranged attack. The Ghosts from the Death Scythe are considered ranged attacks. I'm pretty sure that the Electrodynamics, I'm pretty sure those orbs are considered ranged attacks. So there are other things that you can use this with outside of infantry bow or outside of, just like a regular tactics weapon. And I think that that's helpful to kind of like poke around the wiki to see what other items are considered ranged. Like I said, Death Scythe is a perfect example. If you take this off color with a survival build, those ghosts, those exploding ghosts who already do a good amount of critical damage are going to do an extra 30, 35, whatever % damage. So worth checking into. And again, personally, I love it. There is a cool build. I think I mentioned this in my my tactics melee tier list, but there's a cool build that someone, I already forget, I'm going to butcher their name again. They were around a few years ago, Azumala Fairy or something Azumala, whatever, some kind of Azumala Fairy, I think is what it was. But they're the first person I saw that had a video up called True Archer build. And basically you take infantry bow and point blank, and you take marksman bow and tranquility at the same time. So that way, no matter where you are, you're getting a damage bonus, and you're also getting crits, which I think is super cool. So very fun. If you haven't tried point blank, do it. If you haven't tried a True Archer build, give it a shot. Grab both of those bows, grab both of those mutations, and then enjoy your damage bonus and your multitude of crits. Next up, we have Crow's Foot. So Crow's Foot is a mutation that pops out of a chest in your first challenge rift. So whenever you go into a challenge rift, when you open the chest in there, this blueprint's going to drop out. What it does is it drops 3 caltrops, which will slow the enemies and will have them take base damage. The damage is per Crow's Foot. So if they are, if there's 3 of them, my understanding is that each one is going to do whatever this damage is. As you can see, again, at low scrolls, I feel like this is not, the numbers aren't great. The slow is always going to be the same though. So if you're just looking to get some extra slow, you might want to pair this with that Frostbite mutation that I mentioned that we'll talk about a little bit later. It can be helpful, but I feel like if you're using it for damage, it's not really going to pop until later on. And even then, I feel like the damage is kind of low. I think it's really funny that they scaled it up to 60 stats because nobody ever has naturally gotten 60 stats. Like mid 40s, sure, that's definitely happened, but this is really funny to me because you see those are the numbers that you want. Those are the numbers that you want, but you're never going to get them. Personally, I don't take Crow's Foot. Is it Crow's Foot or Crow's Feet? Crow's Foot. I don't take it that often. And this also kind of like leads into a little bit of sort of what I was talking about with melee. I like to have a little bit more control over my status effects and over my slowing and stuff like that. And with melee, you can control it by how you use your melee items. But with Crow's Foot, you're rolling all over the place. You can have up to 9, I think. Yeah, you can have up to 9 of them. So enemies might end up getting slowed when you don't expect them to. And I feel like it can just personally throw my vibe off a lot. But that said, I have seen a bunch of folks take Crow's Foot with their tactics builds. Some people find it helpful to slow the enemies so that way they can get away and they can do more damage. Say they're going to slow them down so that way they can get in tranquility range or something like that. There are uses for it, but again, just my own personal usage. I don't lean into it too often. And I feel like we're going to see a few of those as we kind of wrap up with tactics. Generally, I find that there are some mutations that are just really, really good. And I find that there are other mutations that have limited use or just aren't things that I use often, right? So speaking of, this is Parting Gift. So you can find the Parting Gift blueprint. I believe this is in the graveyard, right? Yep, secret area in the graveyard. So whenever you kill an enemy with a ranged attack, the enemy will drop a bomb, which will damage enemies in the area. So think of like, the bombs that you have, like if you have an item that drops a grenade, right? Or if you are getting attacked by a grenadier or something like that, the bomb will drop down from the enemy that you kill, and it will do a damage. So it detonates after a little bit over a half a second, and then it does a little pop of damage. The area of effect is 6 tiles, which is pretty decent. It's a pretty decent spread. But I feel like with my own play style with tactics, the enemies that I'm killing that are nearby that parting gift bomb are probably going to be dead by the time it pops or close to it. So for me, this is something that I rarely take. Again, I feel like there's just stronger choices for myself that I like. And again, I feel like the damage just isn't great. But I have seen runs where folks will take this with like electric whip or whatever, and they'll go through an area where there's a ton of bats and other stuff, and you just kind of have like a little cascade of all these bombs going off. So it may be helpful for you, but for me, it's not something that I lean into. So this here is Ranger's gear, and as you can see, it is similar to Scheme, where Scheme will have your next melee attack do damage after a skill. Ranger's gear makes it so that your next ranged attack after a skill does a certain amount of damage. Again, these flat numbers are not recommended for off-color builds. I have used this with pretty much the only item that I end up using this with is the Wave of Denial. It's got a 5-second it's so cool. It's got a 5-second cooldown, and you can basically use Wave of Denial, pop an enemy off of an edge or towards a wall, and then get the extra damage bonus. So I feel like I'll use it with that, but in general, it's not something I take all the time, if at all. It's something I rarely take. And yeah, I feel like, all right, so when I mentioned earlier that there's probably going to be a bit of a spread between how often I take something, generally, like, I feel like there's going to be some mutations here that I just don't have a lot to say about, right? I feel like it does one thing, and it's something that I don't use that often. Like, there's really not much else to say. If you haven't used it, again, like all of these things here, stuff that you haven't tried, definitely try it out. Try it out with Wave of Denial. Try it out with something like Phaser, since that has such a short cooldown. See if it fits your playstyle, but for me personally, it doesn't do much. So next up, we are going to look at Barbed Tips. And what Barbed Tips does is it's a mutation that provides damage over time for every arrow that is stuck to an enemy. They nerfed this twice, I think. So yeah, so they introduced it. They nerfed it pretty hard as far as base DPS goes, and then they also reduced, so they increased, so they decreased the base DPS in 2.4, then they increased it, but then reduced the amount of DPS that every arrow's in there. So you're going to be getting a higher tick, but it's going to be doing less for every arrow. So basically, like, the way that Barbed Tips works best, in my opinion, is you're going to want to have something that has a higher rate of fire so you can have more arrows in the enemy. So think of something like a quick bow. Think of something with like repeater crossbow, right? So that way you can put a bunch of arrows in the enemies, allow the DPS to start ticking down. The more arrows you have, the more damage it's going to do. So I feel like it doesn't really do well with smaller, or I should say like slower shooting things. So like, I don't know, Nerves of Steel, even like something like infantry bow, marksman bow. Like, I feel like that stuff's not really gonna take good advantage of it. So you're gonna want to use it with something fast. The other side of it is when the ammo is in the enemy, it's not in your quiver, which means that instead of doing whatever base damage of your main weapon, you're gonna end up just waiting for your ammo to come back to you, which can be frustrating. There are ways to mitigate this, namely the ammo mutation is probably the best, so that way you can get double the ammo, which means you're going to get extra dot from the barbed tips. You could use some grenades have an affix that will return arrows back to you, so you could use that, but then again you're going to get your arrows back but lose the dot from barbed tips. And the other thing you could do is you can use Ripper to get the arrows back, do some extra damage, and then reapply. I take barbed tips sometimes, and for me, if you've seen some of my 5BC runs, you will notice that this is something that I will take with a 5BC ranged item. I will take support, I will take barbed tips, I will take point blank, I will throw a trap down, and I'll use that item, or I'll use repeater crossbow or something like that to just get a ton of damage really quickly. Again, it's not something you're going to want to take with the slower weapon, just because the more arrows that are in the enemy, the more damage you're going to take, or excuse me, the more damage they're going to take. So, but yeah, again, this is, and it's interesting too. So this was, so somebody named the Forsaken One recommended this, the aforementioned point blank, which is sick, and then another mutation called No Mercy that we're going to get into. So that must be really cool, because all three of these are interesting, at the least interesting, at the best really useful, and I think it's super cool that one person suggested all three of them. So really, really cool. This is Tactical Retreat. So the way that Tactical Retreat works is when you roll through an enemy and dodge an attack, all of the enemies nearby will slow down for either 1 second, anywhere between 1 and 3 seconds, depending on how many stats you have. In general, this doesn't seem exciting. What does make it exciting for me is that the radius of this is 15 tiles, so it's got like a really good range. Sort of like what I said about Crow's Foot. If you're rolling through enemies and you're proccing the effect of Tactical Retreat, you're going to lose a little bit of the control that you have over what gets slowed and when, just because rolling is something that happens often. Dodging attacks happens often because enemies are always coming after you. But I feel like the area of effect's cool, and I do feel like when you compare this with something like Frostbite, and then bats will just evaporate if they're nearby, because the damage from Frostbite will work really well with Tactical Retreat. I don't take it that often, similar to Crow's Foot. I feel like every once in a while I'll grab it. And it was funny. I don't know, whenever it was, a couple weeks ago, I was on Discord call with Modesto, and I think I was doing a tactics run, and I just grabbed it just because we were just like, oh, let's try. I was like, he's like, why'd you do that or whatever? I was like, I'm just trying something new. Just trying something I don't use too often, but it's interesting, it is interesting. But I feel like the use case for it is kind of specific. And there are other things that I lean towards, but it might add some extra safety into your gameplay. So we got 3 more tactics mutations. I'm just going to pull them all up here, so that way we've got them ready to go. So this is networking. Networking also got a recent buff. May have been 3.3 or 3.4. Yep. So networking got buffed in 3.4. And it also got buffed in 2.4. So originally, the way that this used to work is that any enemy that had an arrow in it would share a percentage of the damage that they receive. Now it works with any ranged attack. So the arrow, unlike barbed tips, the arrow does not need to be in the enemy. You can use this with throwing knives as much as you can use it with firebrands or Boy's X. It doesn't matter. Any sort, electric whip. Super, super, super viable now, because you're not just relying on arrow-based enemies. And the thing is you have arrows in an enemy, and then if the arrow pops out, the damage gets lost, right? But now it doesn't matter. Any ranged attack is going to proc this extra damage bonus. So I have a video up on my channel called Random Tactics I think I put it up late last year. And it shows some networking gameplay where I use I think I use Medusa's Head in networking, in War Javelin. Like I have like a really strange setup, but it works because you roll the Medusa head through the enemy. It hits 3 or 4 enemies and then they all start sharing damage and you kill one enemy and it just kind of takes out the rest, you know? This is very similar. I've been playing a lot of Hades recently. The original Hades, not the sequel that's in early access. But this reminds me a lot of Rama, which is the secret aspect of the bow. And basically what Rama does is you use your special and it shoots all these little arrows around, and then every enemy has like a status marker on top of it, and it will every enemy that has that marker, when you hit one enemy, they'll all take damage. It's called shared suffering. And I actually think I'm going to pull up the Hades wiki. I got that bookmark too. I actually think it is also, I think it's 30%, which I think would be super funny if it was the same percentage. Yeah. There we go. So the way that networking works is very similar to the way that the Hades bow of Rama works. So side note, I got a lot of Hades on the mind. I take networking often, very powerful. And again, I mentioned earlier, talking about Tranquility, you can take networking with that Wings of the Crow build where you just do a bunch of dot and fly around the levels. Enemies are going to share damage. They're going to pop really quickly. The numbers are, personally, because I feel like you're not going to get a ton of usage out of this on other colors because there are so many ranged items in tactics. I feel like this is an on-color item or an on-color mutation, not to be taken with brutality or survival. But yeah, these numbers, even though, you know, 54, 57, like these numbers don't look super high. They do some good damage, especially when you're going through and you're tagging 3 or 4 enemies with a bow that pierces targets. Like you can get a lot of damage really quickly. We have 2 more for tactics. This mutation here is called Ripper, and I mentioned it a little bit with Barb tips. And the way that Ripper works is when you have arrows in an enemy or projectiles that are in an enemy, using a melee attack will cause the projectiles to fall, so you get those arrows or knives back or whatever it is, and then it does extra damage for each projectile that falls out. It's like exit wounds in Hades. That's the last Hades thing I'll say, I promise. I promise. But yeah, so this is helpful in very specific situations, in my opinion. It will generally require you to have 2 items dedicated to it. So in order to get the arrows back, which are coming from a ranged item, you need a melee item to then hit the enemy with to get the arrows back. I don't know if it's worth dedicating 2 main slots to, unless that's already the build, right? Unless you're already jamming with like a quick bow and Valmont's whip or whatever, right? If you're already jamming with that stuff and you want to grab Ripper, then that's perfect, right? Because you're not going out of your way to build around Ripper. You already have a build that Ripper fits in with. Another item, the perfect, in my opinion, the perfect Ripper item is the shrapnel axes, which will, you swing the axes and they shoot out like little knives, little ninja stars. I forget what the actual word is. It's like tacks. It shoots out tacks at the enemy that gets stuck in the enemy. But when you are close to them, the axes do melee damage. So you can shoot those projectiles from further away, get them stuck in the enemy, and then using that same item, go up to them, hit them with the axes, so that way they drop. They drop all the projectiles and then take damage for each one that drops. Because this is such a specific use, in my opinion, I don't take it too often, but if I do perchance take a tactics shrapnel axes for whatever reason, I'll take, oh Jesus, sorry about that. I'll take Ripper. I'll take it because it's built right in, right? It's built right into the mechanics of that weapon. I don't need to build around it. It's just something that, yeah, I feel like it fits in very specific cases, so I don't take it that often. Acrobatipack is the final tactics mutation, and this is the ranged backpack item. So the way that this one works, so like Porcupack, right? You put something in, when you roll, it'll do melee damage with the item in the backpack. With Acrobatipack, what happens is you roll. It's interesting. So you put an item in your backpack, you roll, and then what happens is that your next range attack will shoot whatever's in your backpack along with it. And it does a smaller amount of damage. So you can see Porcupack, like we talked about, 75% base. Acrobatipack is really strong, in my opinion, so it makes sense that they have a lower base value for it. So let's say you have Hokuto. Here we go, perfect. So if you have Hokuto's bow in your backpack and you have Alchemic Carbine in your main slot, if you're using Acrobatipack, what will happen is if you just shoot the Alchemic Carbine, nothing will happen. It'll just be normal. If you roll and then shoot your carbine, the Hokuto's bow is going to go along with it. So both projectiles will go out at the same time. You'll know when your Acrobatipack is ready because it almost has like a little shimmer around your character, if that makes sense, like a little bit of like a particle effect around you. So that way you can do that, and then you'll know when it's time, and then you can roll and shoot, and you're going to get some extra damage out of it. Because the damage, even at higher scroll counts, like the damage isn't super high compared to some of the other damages. Like I said, with Porcupack, you're looking at 75%. Generally, it's something that I will use more with utility weapons or with damage over time weapons. So like Alchemic Carbine, like I mentioned, Hokuto's bow. I love putting Gilded Yumi or the War Javelin in the backpack, so that way as you're rolling and you're shooting stuff, enemies are just getting chucked all the way across the screen. Super fun. I think it's super fun. I use Acrobatipack all the time. Incredibly high. It's like a low skill ceiling, high utility, high payout kind of a mutation. And especially, like I mentioned, you know, there are a lot of things. There's a lot of things that can really beef up a build in this spot, like Hokuto's bow, like Alchemic Carbine to get extra poison, you know, like the War Javelin if you want to see enemies fly across the screen. But there's tons of it. You can pop any ranged item in there and you're going to get some good utility out of it. So I think it's really sweet. All right. Next up, we have our survival mutations. I'm just going to take a quick sip of my drink. It's getting hot in here. It's getting a little parched. A little parched up here in Seaside, Massachusetts. All right, so next up we got our survival mutations. So these are the 3 that are unlocked by default at the beginning of the game. We're looking at Blind Faith, which is your parry cooldown mutation, similar to, like I mentioned, Hunter's Instinct up here and Killer Instinct. We have Counterattack, which will allow you to do extra damage after you parry. So similar to where am I looking at? Similar like a Ranger's gear or scheme, where you have an action and then after that the next attack does a flat damage bonus. And then finally is Necromancy, which grants you healing on every enemy that you kill. So like I mentioned, Brutality, we're looking at melee, little bit of damage increase, right? Tactics, we're looking at stuff that does traps, or we're looking at things that are, you know, generally for ranged items. And then for survival, we're looking at stuff that plays into shields or into healing. So a lot of the mutations here for the green mutations, for the most part, are gonna vibe with 1 or 2 of those things. Blind Faith is, let's look at Blind Faith first. So with every parry, your cooldown reduction your skill will have cooldown reduction. So this is part of that active skill cooldown. On color, this gets really absurd. 6 seconds is a lot. So if you have a powerful grenade and you use it and you quickly parry 2 attacks, you can immediately use that powerful grenade. That's huge. Off color, if you happen to have a parry shield and you're running a tactics build, or you happen to have a frontline shield or a bloodthirsty shield and you're running a brutality build, lower scroll counts, like 3 seconds is still a lot, especially considering how many enemies are going to be attacking you, how many melee attacks you can parry, etc. So based on that, this is something that I would recommend taking off color. Sometimes I do. On color, it's ridiculous as far as the amount of cooldown that you get. I take this thing very often, and I really enjoy it. I kind of like the game within a game, right, where you're actively needing to find windows to parry, so that way you can get that skill cooldown. And again, the way that this increases it's pretty wild. So. Again, not much to say about this one. It is straightforward. You parry, you get cooldown. Those numbers are big. Use it. It's good. Next up is Counterattack. And Counterattack, on the other hand, has low flat damage. So even at higher scroll counts, I feel like these damage numbers aren't great. If this was similar, like what am I thinking? Like grappling hook that does a flat a percentage damage. If this was a percentage damage, right, where after you parry, your next attack does an extra 5% damage or 10% damage or 20% damage, I feel like this would be very useful. But as is, even on color, there are better options. I personally do not take Counterattack very often, if at all. Because like I said, there are other things in there that, if I'm looking for extra damage, there's better ways to do it. Especially with something like Spite, because you get that bonus damage from the parry, not from the attack afterwards. If you have a turret, if you have a wolf trap, or you have a scavenge bombard or something, you can take support. Like, I feel like there's better options to bump your damage up. And there's also better options either in survival or in colorless, for my own opinion. So I don't take this often. The third of the freebies, we're looking at Necromancy. So Necromancy has had a history. It's changed a lot. Originally, what would happen with Necro is every enemy would heal you all the way up. It would heal you a base amount for every kill, all the way up to 100%. So you could take this, and it would also be you could easily, especially on higher scroll and higher biomes, you could easily heal yourself all the way back up. Evil Empire knew it was a problem, so they bounced it down to 50%. Then in 2.4, they changed the recovery amount, so you're getting a little bit more recovery and you're getting a higher cap. What they don't show here is it got buffed again. Might have been some, I don't know, pick a number, 3-1, 3-2, 3-3, 3-4, so I think it might have been like early 3 points. They made it so that way you can go all the way back to 100%. Here we go. Yep, so the details actually show this. So it's almost like now it's at a point where it's been balanced. So when it was first introduced, it was so overpowered. It was unreasonable. And then when they nerfed it, it became kind of, there were other options, because you just would get capped at 50%. So it wasn't as useful. But now it will heal you all the way up to 100%. But based on how close you get to 100%, the effect will decrease. And then also, depending on the base hit points of the enemy, the healing will be reduced or increased. So I feel like there are other variables here. As you can see, there is a Google sheet here that will calculate how the damage is dealt. I'm going to leave. Yeah, so like you can see there's different values. You can add stuff in here. If you are interested in finding out how much Necro will heal, check out that sheet. But otherwise, just know that if you're taking this on color, which is, I don't recommend taking this off color, like these are low percentage values. If you're taking this on color, it is generally a really solid bet. I'm going to put this towards often. I do take it a lot. There are other mutations I take more frequently. specifically a couple others that we're going to get to later on. But for what it is, take it into a biome and you'll see your health increase, right? That's basically it. You kill stuff, you get health back. It gets pretty strong at higher scroll levels. So super cool mutation. I'm gonna put the 2 shield ones together. We'll do these back to back. So the first of the next shield mutations is What Doesn't Kill Me. So this is a very common drop, 100% drop from the disgusting worms. So those are the like the slugs that will spawn the explosive bombs, the explosive eggs in the sewer. So you're going to get that 100% of the time that you kill those things, if another blueprint has not dropped. Base percentage per parry. So you parry and it will heal you for a small percentage. Base percentage is 2%. As you get higher, I think it goes up to 6, right? Yeah. Again, just like Blind Faith, like 6% is ridiculous. So whereas Necromancy is more of a passive healing, right? You're just going to be killing enemies because you're going to do that anyways. You'll just get the healing back. With What Doesn't Kill Me, you need to actively prepare to parry a melee attack, which does put you a little bit at risk, right? If you mistime your parry, or if you hold the shield button instead of just pressing it and you block, you'll take damage, so there's a couple of other variables here. But it's hard to argue against the percentage numbers here. Again, even off color, if you take this with Brutality, every parry is going to give you generally will give you between 2 and 2.5% if you take it off color. So it's like those numbers are pretty decent. Again, especially when I mentioned Adrenalin and Frenzy, there are better options. This is one of those better options in my opinion. I do take this often. The reason I don't take it always is because Gastronomy is my go-to for healing, which we'll get into. But if I want to have that more active healing, or if I need bigger chunks, or I'm not, I don't trust that I'm going to be finding a lot of food or whatever it is, I'll take What Doesn't Kill Me. The cooldown, I think, is 30 seconds, right? Yeah, so it's 30 seconds. So what that means is that every enemy that you parry, if you take it against the boss, you need to wait 30 seconds before you can get that healing back. That does not count against the ads, and it does not count against Conjunctivius's tentacles because they're all individual enemies. So each tentacle phase, I think the first one has 4 or 5, and then the next one has 5 or 6 or 7, whatever it is. If you take this into the conjunct fight, you're probably going to heal half of your health if you're parrying the tentacles as they're coming out. So it's kind of like a niche use for it, but it's super useful in that fight. But in general, again, really strong. These numbers are really good. They're incredible in my opinion. They're incredible on color, especially as you get to these higher scroll count, but they're also really good for off color too if you're looking for some extra healing. So, and now on the other side of Counterattack, we have Spite, which is basically just the Spite shield icon put into a mutation, right? So the way that Spite works is that it will do additional damage with every successful parry. So I want to look at these two side by side. Right. All right. So after you parry, you're getting extra flat damage. Let's see. So at 20 scrolls, this is about 2,000. At 20 scrolls here, it's about 3,000. So that's interesting. So wow. So the damage is actually better with Counterattack, but I feel like the utility is better with Spite. So think about, again, think what I just said, Conjunctivius, right? If you take the spiked sword and you take Spite, you're going to get extra damage from your parries from the Spite mutation. You're going to be doing good critical damage on your parry from the Spike shield. Put those two together and you're going to get some nice chunks on those Conjunctivius tentacles. If you take this into the Hand of the King fight where there's 3 parries back to back with his triple attack, you're going to get the extra damage for each parry with this, regardless of what shield you take. So it doesn't require an additional action. And I guess that makes sense as to why counterattack's numbers are higher. But for me, I prefer to just use Spite. I parry a lot when I play survival. This works. I was just going to say this. It works with Cocoon and Iron Staff, which are items that are not shields, but they do parry. So you can get some decent chunks with this. I take Spite sometimes. And again, I feel like boss fights, super good. I take this into Hand of the King a lot when I have survival builds. I'll take it into Conjunct a lot. And in general, like I feel like it's just a solid. I just feel like it's really solid. And again, you do not need to do anything additional here. And that's the other thing too, is I think this counterattack. I don't know specifically if counterattack is for melee, only melee or ranged as well. It just says the attack. But again, you're getting a little bit less damage from Spite, but you don't have to do the extra work. So for me, that makes it more worth it. All right. We got extended healing. It's so funny. There are some of these that I've seen these icons a billion times, and I'm like, wait, is that emergency triage? Is that which one is that? You know, because some of these icons are very similar. You know, some of them look very similar. So especially ones that I don't use that often. Big surprise. So spoiler, extended healing is something that I don't use often. So let's talk about it. Your health flask normally restores 60% of your health. With extended healing, it will restore the entire 100%. But what happens is that it stretches the duration for 12 seconds and it gives you an increase in damage. So this is similar to, this is almost like the survival version a little bit of Tainted Flask, right? So you're gonna get your healing, but you're also gonna get 12 seconds of base damage here. This is really this is something that you can pair with Emergency Triage, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which speeds up the healing process. You can kind of put those two together, so that way you can get extra damage, full heal, and heal quickly. But in general, this isn't something that I use. It's not something that I use often, because there are other ways to get healing, right? We're looking at Necro in Biomes. We're looking at what doesn't kill me. We're going to talk about Gastronomy. Because there's other ways to heal, I personally don't lean into this because I just get more utilities out of the other mutations. If you have a use for this and there's like a specific build or like a specific combo that you like extended healing for, definitely let me know. I'd be curious to hear it, because again, this isn't something that I take often. I've seen it a million times over the past several years, but I just find that there are other things that I use that are more helpful for me. And now this is cool. So we're going to talk about Heart of Ice, and I believe that Survival is the only color that has 2 cooldown mutations associated with it. So we've already talked about the other 3. We talked about Blind Faith, we talked about Hunter's Instinct and Killer Instinct. Heart of Ice is another cooldown, and basically the way that this reduces your cooldown is if you attack a frozen, slowed, rooted, or stunned enemy, you will get a certain amount of cooldown per hit. Because these numbers are low, it's not something I recommend taking off color. You know, you're off color, you're gonna get less than a second, because generally you're gonna have less than 7 scrolls or whatever in your off color stats, hopefully. So it's not really worth taking off color. On color, because Survival is the stat that leans into freeze, stun, root, slow, because it leans into those more often. I feel like this is really, really useful with a lot of different things. Wolf Trap, Stun Grenade, Ice Grenade, like it self-synergizes with Seismic Strike. You can use it with Baseball Bat and throwable objects. Like, there's so many things that you can use this with. You can use it with Frost Blast and Nutcracker, right? lot of different combinations here because survival does lean so into that crowd control aspect of statuses. I personally will take this often if I'm using, and that's kind of like the only if, like the if asterisk here, the caveat is if I'm using a build that does lean into that sort of crowd control. If I'm just doing a different build, like, I'm not gonna, if I only have an ice grenade, I'm not gonna take this thing because I feel like there are better options for me. But if I'm, using the aforementioned Frost Blast and a stun grenade and Nutcracker, like, yeah, I'm gonna take this thing. I'm gonna take it, and it does good work. It does good work. This also so this also has a storied history where it was introduced in 1.6, and then it had the same effect. You could do frozen, slowed, stunned, or rooted. They changed it so it would not work with slowed enemies, but then they added ranged items. So you could use your bows, you could use close attack, what is it? Close range ranged attacks, right? And then they changed it. They changed some of the cooldown, and then they actually ended adding slow back in. So unfortunately, this is one of those times where the wiki doesn't say where it was changed. It does make a note here that it does work on slow targets as well. But at some point they buffed it again, so it's back and forth here. But as is right now, Heart of Ice is pretty strong. Highly recommended for cooldown, especially if you're running the meta, if you're running the baseball bat with throwable objects and you take this and you take instinct, you're good, you're golden, right? All right, this is Gastronomy. I feel like I've mentioned Gastronomy a few times. We haven't really talked about Gastro and what it does. In my opinion, I think Gastronomy is one of the strongest mutations in the whole game. I take this all the time, and I take it on color, I take it off color. It's incredibly useful regardless of what build you're in. So the way that Gastronomy works is it will increase the effect of food by 65%. And I think I talked about this in my mid-game tutorial video. So what that means is that your small food, generally it would restore 15%. That will boost up to 25%. Your large food will give you 50% healing normally. This will boost it up to 83%. So right off the bat, one piece of large food is going to give you more healing than a flask will if you use Gastronomy. If you don't need the food and you recycle it, you're going to be getting a extra bonus percentage of damage for 300 seconds. That is 5 minutes of gameplay. That is huge. So if you recycle, you can take that damage bonus through an entire boss fight. You can take it through most of a biome. Like 300 seconds is absurd. On color, clearly, the higher scrolls you have, the better that damage boost is going to be. But even if you have low scrolls, like that's like it's a nice little chunk. And for me, that's like the secondary bonus. For me, the real bonus for this is the extra food. You're going to be able to save money on flasks if you use this. So instead of paying $20,000 or 20,000 gold to refresh and add, buy a flask, if you find a large food, you're going to get more healing than you are going to get from the flask. So there you go. You take Gastronomy, you immediately save 20,000 gold if you need a flask. If you recycle it, this extra damage, it stacks, which is great. And the other thing that happens is that the damage bonus lasts even if you remove the mutation. So if you were to be in, let's say you're in the clock tower and there's 3 pieces of food, you recycle all 3 of those, and just for statistical state, right? Let's say that you're getting 15% bonus. You have 6 stats. You're going to get that 45% additive bonus And when you remove Gastronomy to change it with a different mutation, your damage bonus does not go away. So I think even in general, like that's super helpful. So this is based on the fact that you get extra damage, and based on the fact that this is the best healing mutation in the entire game for any color, in my opinion. Incredibly strong, and it is part of the what I call the Holy Trinity, which we will get into a little bit later. In my opinion, unless you're going into a boss fight with, if you're respecing mutations before a boss fight, don't take Gastronomy. But if you're in biomes and stuff, like, there is no better healing. Incredible mutation. Next up, we're going to talk about kill rhythm. So kill rhythm is something that Evil Empire put in the game when they made all of the crossbows double-handed. So back in version 1.9, they ended up changing things like the repeater crossbow, heavy crossbow, explosive, and ice crossbow from being one-handed items to two-handed items. If you've used any of these items, you'll know that your main slot does one thing and the secondary slot kind of primes the main. So for this one, heavy crossbow, your secondary ability will reload and give you criticals on your primary. So you're kind of going back and forth. You're pressing, I use PlayStation, so you're pressing triangle to reload, square to shoot, triangle to reload, square to shoot. These items can be kind of slow, right? And even if you think about other things like the Scythe Claw, right? That's also really slow as you're going back and forth. What kill rhythm does is, as you alternate your attacks with each button, the other one is going to attack quicker, right? So here we go. Exactly. Heavy crossbow, ice crossbow, scythe claws, things like that. It's going to really speed things up. And even though these numbers look small, they're noticeable, right? A 20% speed increase is definitely noticeable with the scythe claws. A 35% speed increase with the heavy crossbow is incredibly noticeable. Since these numbers, even though they look low, are super helpful, you can take this off color and you don't need to use a two-handed item with it, right? You can take this with, I'm just going to throw two things out, throwing knives and blood sword, right? You can take that on a brutality build, and as you're going back and forth between the two, your attacks are going to speed up. Super, super helpful. So I will personally take this sometimes, and the only reason I'm really putting this here is because I need to have a build. Obviously, you need to have a build that's using both of your main slots as primaries. If you're taking a melee item and a shield, like, this isn't going to do anything for you, really. It's not worth it. But if you do have something like these double-handed items or double-slotted items like we talked about, kill rhythm's super helpful. If you have, like, I don't know, you can use this with, like, Boy's Axe and ice shards, like, or put ice shards somewhere and use it. Like, there's a lot of really cool combinations you can use with this thing on or off color. Drops from the Oven Knights, which are the chunky fellas from 2BC and up. They will easily ruin a run sometimes, but they drop this blueprint. It's a rare drop. Super interesting. But again, if you have a double slotted item, it's definitely worth checking out. I'm going to put these two here together. We're leaning more into, like I mentioned earlier, right? We have our parry mutations, and then we have healing mutations and health stuff, because that's kind of like the two things that survival are based around. These two items are going to grant you either health, more health, or damage reduction. And one of them is passive. So the first one here is Soldier's Resistance. And Soldier's Resistance, all it does is it gives you extra hit points. Whatever you have for scroll count, that's the extra percentage that you're going to cap. It caps at 40%. So in survival already has a high health count compared to the other two. So if you have 10,000 health at 21 scrolls or whatever it is, if you take this with you, you're going to have 14,000, which is a nice chunk. You don't have to do anything for this. All you do is you just get extra health. It's extra buffer. It's going to extend your runs. I actually take this often because since survival does kind of lean into the slower, heavier kind of things where you're leaving yourself exposed, like Arthur from Hades. If you're leaving yourself exposed, having extra cushion for when you do take a hit is going to be helpful. And then, of course, if you have Necro, you have Gastronomy, you have What Doesn't Kill Me, you're going to be able to get that health back more quickly. Also, when you pair this with Necro, you're going to get some extra health because of the higher amount of maximum health. Like I mentioned, when you get closer to 100% with Necro, the healing gets lower. So if your health is bigger, it's going to be more of a distance before you get to that point. So extra health can't hurt. And then this is Berserker. So some of you folks may not have seen this or be familiar with it. And the reason for that is that this is a 4 BC and up drop. So an enemy called the Failed Experiment will drop this. They come into play, I think, right... I'm not going to click on that for spoiler reasons. They come into play, I think, right in the prisoner's quarters on 4 BC and up. The reason why... A little bit of history. This used to be Brutality, and before the Malaise was reworked, there used to be a different purpose to this. So the way it works now, survival, you kill an enemy with a melee attack, and it gives you damage reduction for 8 seconds. You'll see like a little shield icon over your head. The way it used to work is when you killed an enemy with this, when it was Brutality prior to the 2.1 Malaise rework, it would give you 5 seconds of damage reduction, and it would also give you 3 seconds of not being able to be infected by the Malaise. So back in the day, you used to be able, instead of Malaise just ticking up on 5 BC, on 4 and 5 BC, you would get Malaise by either eating infected food or by taking hits from an enemy. So if you take 4 hits in the prisoner's quarters, your Malaise is already at 4 out of 10, which is crazy. So this was super useful back then. On color, off color, didn't matter. But now what it does is it just gives you the extra damage reduction. In my opinion, this is something that doesn't need to be capped from a 4 BC enemy anymore, because since it's not using the Malaise mechanics, which used to be 4 and 5 BC, I feel like they should have moved this from a Failed Experiment somewhere else, maybe to the Oven Knight or something like that, right? Because as folks are getting comfortable with the game, as people are leaning into survival builds and trying different things, like having something like this would be really helpful on 0 BC or 2 BC or 3 BC, right? By the time you get it, it's almost like, I feel like some of the utility is drawn out of it because you're going to have other options already in place. Like I mentioned, Soldier's Resistance, you're going to have Gastro for extra healing, etc., right? So I feel like the potential for Berserker is not as strong as it used to be, and it's not as strong as it could be, right? I will take it sometimes just because, like I mentioned, you're opening yourself up a lot with survival builds, with slower items. So it can be helpful. So, generally what I'll do is if I'm having like a tough run and I'm just trying to like make it through and I'm not doing well with survival, I'll take Soldier's Resistance for the extra health. I'll take Necro for the easy healing. I'll take it instead of Gastronomy because that way I'll just be able to passively heal and not worry about food. And then I'll take Berserker so that way I'm getting more health, free healing, and damage reduction, right? But as I just said, I feel like the potential for this is not as good as it used to be, not as good as it could be, but it's still worth taking if you're running survival melee. Last of the survivals, is that like a band? Last of the survival mutations and the last of the backpack mutations is Armadillopack. So if you've seen my shields tier list, or if you've seen my shields video, you will know that I take Armadillopack all the time. I will take it on color, I'll take it off color, because the utility that this allows is just, it's so good. So basically,
where Porcupack, you put a melee item in the backpack. Acrobatipack, you put the ranged item in the backpack. With Armadillopack, you put a shield in the backpack. As you roll, your shield will allow you to parry. You'll see like a little, almost like a little energy field that's near you. Cooldown of 3 seconds if you parry, right? If you don't parry, you can just keep rolling until you hit that parry. The fact that this also will reflect projectiles and bombs, super helpful. Again, like items like enemies like the disgusting worms, I think is what they're called. The ones I talked about with What Doesn't Kill Me, those things in the sewers that drop bombs. Hand of the King, like, you know, bombardiers, like there's so many useful things that you can use this for, even just reflecting bombs, not even talking about parrying. When you roll, as you know, you have iframes. So as you're rolling into enemies with that Armadillopack, not only are you invincible rolling in, but you're going to get that parry if you time it right. That parry also will allow you to use things like Blind Faith, What Doesn't Kill Me, Spite. So you're going to get cooldown reduction or healing or extra damage when you roll through. It does a percentage of the shield's damage, which to me, like, unless you're using punishment or unless you're using spiked shield, I feel like this doesn't even matter, because you're using a shield generally. Let me rephrase that. I'm using a shield for like utility. I'm using an ice shield to reflect projectiles back to freeze enemies. I'm using blood shield to proc bleed, like whatever it is. I would even pay attention to these numbers. You can take this in any build where you need a shield. Pick a color, pick a shield. Again, if you're using punishment or spike shield, you know, you're not going to get damage out of it. But again, it's more for the utility of the parrying, more of the utility of reflecting projectiles and bombs and extending those iframes into a parry. It's just so good, super helpful, and in my opinion is my favorite of the backpack mutations. It's just across the board super sick. All right, we are 36 down. Good Lord, 36 down and 17 to go, right? Yeah, 17 colorless mutations to go. Okay. The good news is I think these mutations are pretty straight up. So hopefully we'll get through these a little bit more quickly than we got through the other ones. So without further ado, let's roll. So the first two mutations that you're going to get colorless that come with the game, comes with the game like the treat in the cereal box, is Instinct of the Master of Arms, which is, as you can tell by the little clock, it will grant you cooldown with any build with every critical hit. The second one is affectionately called YOLO because the words from each, first letter from each word spells YOLO. You only live once, which is funny. But Ygdar Orus Li Ox is what they call it. So what YOLO does is it will save you one time. It will allow you to survive it as long as you're not cursed. It will allow you to survive a death blow. It's kind of cool. Like all of your cells come flying out of you, almost like Sonic the Hedgehog when he loses his rings, which I think may or may not have been a nod to the Sonic games. Probably was, since there is the delayed Hedgehog outfit in the game. But yeah, so you use it. It will save you from a blow. But it locks your mutation slot. So I put these two side by side. When you haven't used YOLO yet and it's in your mutations, it looks like this. When you have used it and it's popped, you'll see this here and you can never remove this. I'm just going to move this back down here since it's the same thing. So Instinct, as I mentioned, it reduces the cooldown on your skills for every critical hit. The cooldown is kind of low, but unlike Hunter's Instinct, unlike Killer Instinct, you can take this into a boss fight as long as you have an item that does criticals, right? So it's really good for, generally, it can be really good, really strong in boss fights if you're looking for that sort of cooldown. I will take it sometimes for that very reason. Master, right? Oh, Instinct. There we go. I will take it for that specific reason. But again, I prefer Blind Faith, but I'll take this sometimes. Again, pretty straightforward. And since it's a colorless mutation, which I think I mentioned earlier, I'll mention again, anything here that scales, which actually a lot of this doesn't scale, but anything that does scale as a colorless mutation, it will scale off of your highest stat. So doesn't matter. You can take Instinct with Sadist Stiletto and Tactics. You can take it with Oven Axe in Survival, and whatever critical hits you're doing, whatever the highest stat is, that's what it's going to scale with. YOLO to me is hear me out. It is the perfect beginner's mutation because it gives folks an extra cushion. It's like it's like Death Defiance in Hades. I know I promised I wouldn't talk about it again. I've already mentioned it 3 more times, but it's like a Death Defiance in Hades, right? Where it gives you that extra buff or extra buffer where you think you're going to lose a run and you don't, and you're back in it. The visual effect of all your cells flying out and then coming back to you, like, it's exciting. It's nerve-wracking, but you're just like, oh man, I still have a little bit more to go. So as a beginner, until you get the next mutation we're going to talk about, I recommend taking YOLO. I really do. There are options, as obviously as you can see, there's plenty of options we've already talked about as far as things that can get your damage up or get some health back and stuff like that. But from the get-go, I do recommend taking YOLO because it's going to allow you to just stretch your run out that much longer, right? So when you're trying to get all of the runes earlier in the game, if you're trying to go blueprint hunting even later in the game, it's worth taking. I feel like there are specific use cases for it. I'm going to put this here in the not often category. And the reason why I put it up here is sometimes I'm going to do runs where I'm grinding for the forge on a fresh save file. I'm trying to get blueprints later in the game, and I just don't want to lose a run. I will double this up with disengagement sometimes just to make sure that I'm not going to lose those 500 cells on my way to the forge as I'm doing my grind runs or whatever it is, right? Aside from those specific use situations, I do think that disengagement is a much better choice. But for beginners and for people that need a little extra cushion, especially on those farming runs, it's worth it. Don't forget about this guy, right? And again, beginners, like, definitely take it, enjoy it. And then once you start to get comfortable and you feel like you're losing your runs less, fill that slot with something else, right? Disengagement is next, and disengagement does outclass YOLO very quickly. And the reason for that is what it does is it will protect you from one fatal hit every single biome. So that counts, you can do it once every level, once every boss. If your hit points fall below 15%, you'll be protected by a force field, which will give you just enough time to heal. It will give you just enough time to roll away from an enemy. It may give you just enough time, if you're sparring blow for blow, to allow you to finish the boss fight while you're in that protective shield. The way that this works now, let me just look at the history really quickly. Yeah, there we go. The way that it used to work is it used to be on a 120-second cooldown. So you could take a fatal hit and then wait. You could just find a room, let the cooldown go for 2 minutes, or after a boss fight, you could just stand in the empty boss fight room and let it come back. But now they don't let you do that. They do it one per thing, right? When it doesn't work, though, is if you take a huge hit that will take you all the way down below 0%. I feel like this doesn't happen too often, but it's just something to keep in mind. I take disengagement often. I don't take it every run, just because, as you can see, there are other things that I kind of like to load my builds with, regardless of what color I'm using. But it is such a great parachute. It's such a great safety shield to have. And again, like, once you outgrow YOLO, disengagement is great. If you're worried about a boss fight, take disengagement. If you're going into a biome that you're not comfortable with, take disengagement. If you're making your way through 5BC and you get to the end game content, please take disengagement. Super strong, super helpful. And that is the second. I mentioned the Holy Trinity. We have Gastro, we got Disengagement, and then the final mutation of the Holy Trilogy is Masochist. Masochist will reduce all trap damage to 10% of your max hit points, and then it will give you movement speed bonus for 20 seconds. The movement speed is nice because you can pair it with something like Swift Sword or other things that will allow you to like velocity, like whatever. But the main pull of this here is to cap trap damage at 10%. This is a godsend in things like, it's great in the clock tower. How many times have you jumped up or slammed down in the clock tower to hit one of those spinning balls, right? How many times have you lost a run in the distillery? How many times have you jumped into a wall of spikes in High Peak Castle trying to get away from one of the knights, right? There's a lot of areas where traps are. How many times have you gone through a challenge rift and had to use a flask, right? And since it caps out at 10% of your max HP, you're able to take 9 hits with full health from any trap before you have to heal. Super, super strong. I take this sometimes. I know I just like built it up and I'm like, and sometimes. Again, the reason why I take it sometimes is there's other stuff I like to use, but for the ultimate safety in any run, I'm actually going to pull these out for a moment so I can put them down here. For the ultimate safety in any run, these are the 3 mutations to take, in my opinion. As we already talked about, you get the extra health from food from Gastro. So like right off the bat, you're getting more healing from the food that drops than you are from your flasks, right? Super good. Disengagement is going to protect you from pretty much one fatal hit every biome. And then Masochist is going to allow you to take more damage from traps. So that way you're not going to lose as much health. You pair the 3 of these together and you're going to extend your run. Yes, you're going to lose out on some damage bonuses. Yes, there may be other things that might be helpful if you're running certain builds or whatever. But in general, these 3, they're my Holy Trinity. I used to play them all the time. You know what? I'm going to go back into the Twitch. I guarantee you earlier in my Twitch stuff. Let me see. Yep. Oh, I was using Alienation a lot back then too. All right. So anyways, I'm sure there's videos in here. I'm sure there's videos in here of me. There you go. Right here. Right. So this is from July of 2020, going through the ramparts with the tactics build. I look really grumpy. My beard looks awful in that. But yeah, Disengagement, Masochist, Gastro, Disengagement, Masochist, Gastro. Yep, going through the whole game with these things. So when I first started learning how to play Dead Cells, like these really, really, really helped me out. So if you are at a point where you're looking to extend your runs, you want to get some extra cushion, take these 3. Super, super helpful. All right, let me just re-alphabetize these things real quick. Masochist, melee. Okay, perfect. So Velocity is next up. So all Velocity does is it will increase your speed boost for 3 times the amount that you're going to be doing it. So you get 30 seconds instead of 10, and as you kill enemies, the speed boost will refresh. So you could theoretically, after you kill a few enemies, which I think it's 5, right? If you kill 8 enemies in a short amount of time, you get a speed boost. So you kill 8 enemies at the beginning of a level. If you continue killing as you're moving really quickly every 30 seconds, this buff could last for a long time. Love it with the Swift Sword. Absolutely, like if I'm ever playing a Swift Sword build, I will definitely take Velocity just because that extra time is super useful. But that's it. It makes you go fast. It makes you go fast. I take it sometimes, right? Kind of like I was saying, some of these are just so straight up that there's not a lot to say, right? Speaking of, ammo is up next. And what ammo does is it doubles your ammo. It works with everything. They nerfed it so that way it wouldn't work with things like Boy's Axe, Boomerang. But now anything that has ammo can be effectively doubled by taking this ammunition. Incredibly useful with Cross, incredibly useful with Boomerang. There are still 2 that it doesn't work with, Gilded Yumi and Laser Glaive. But it's wild. And the thing is too, is so the legendary versions of Cross and Boomerang, and Boy's Axe, but Cross and Boomerang will give you an extra item. So if you have a legendary cross and you take ammo, you're going to have 3 crosses from one slot. Like it's going to melt things. It's really strong. Of course, you need to have a ranged item for this, right? So if you don't, it's not worthwhile at all. So I will take this sometimes. Again, as I mentioned earlier with barb tips, I might take it. I will take it if I find a legendary cross or a legendary boomerang. Like you can bet your ass I'm going to take this, like for sure. But again, I take it sometimes just because you do need to have a ranged item for it, and some stuff just doesn't benefit from it as much as others, but it does what it says on the box, right? I'm going to move a couple of these things real quick. All right. So this mutation here is recovery, and what it does is, just like how velocity multiplied your speed boost 3 times, what recovery does is it will allow you to have 3 times as much time to get your rally health back. So what that means is that when you take a hit, you'll notice your health just doesn't disappear. It has like an orange bar, and your health will slowly start to tick down. With recovery, that amount of time that it takes to tick down is slowed. Instead of if it takes 5 seconds, it's going to take 15 seconds or whatever it is, right? So that way you have more time to attack the enemy to get your health back, like super Bloodborne, right? It does one thing and it does it well. So for me, this is like kind of like in the middle here. I will take this, like I mentioned, with like a survival build. I take soldier resistance and stuff like that. I will take that. I'm gonna pop it up here. I will take this sometimes because, like, again, there are some runs where like it's not clicking, right? Things aren't moving along well. I'm not doing great. I'm taking a lot of damage, and if I'm in that headspace or my build's not really good or whatever it is, like I know that I can use recovery to get health back. So I feel like this is a mutation that some folks will kind of age out of, if that makes sense, as people get more skilled and as they put more hours in the game and they start leaning into other things. Like, I feel like recovery kind of gets lost a little bit, but it does have its uses, so don't forget about it. This is the 3rd mutation that was suggested by that Reddit user, forget what they were called. The something one. I forget what it's called. But all No Mercy does is if an enemy hits 15% health, they will die. If a boss hits 7.5% of their health, they'll die. So basically what you're doing is you can almost think of it as just like a 15% damage boost or a 7.5% damage boost. I find that for bosses, you can take this in boss rush just because it's pure agony, and having this there will make things kind of go by 7.5% quicker. I really like taking this for damage over time in biomes. Every little bit helps. I know that there may be better mutations for that, but personally, I like it. I like the effect. I like how there's this big red word that says executed above an enemy, and it just feels like I'm getting like a little bit out of it, again, there may be better, and of course, 15% compared to the 35% of support or the 30% of point blank or the 25% of tranquility, like it's not as strong, but it's just something that I like. It's something I like to do. So if I do take a Kudos bow in the backpack with Alchemic Carbine as my main item, I might take No Mercy just because, so I'll take this thing sometimes. Again, even though the numbers are not as strong as other things, like it's just cool, kind of like what I was saying about initiative. It's just something I like, something I enjoy taking. So these two are colored as survival, but in, I think it was 3.4, Frostbite got moved to colorless, and maybe 3.3.0 or something, Dead Inside got changed. So these are effectively colorless. Don't pay attention to the color here. So Frostbite, I had mentioned earlier. What Frostbite does is enemies will suffer DPS. they'll suffer damage for every slow stack they have, and they will for every additional slow stack it will increase, right? So if you have one slow over an enemy at 8 scrolls, you're going to get 80 DPS out of it. If you have 4 slow stats or like slow icons, you're going to get 320. So you want to stack your slow here. What's super cool now is when they buffed it in 3.4, they did reduce the base DPS, but now they rework slow so that way 5 stacks of slow will freeze an enemy. And when you freeze an enemy, it's going to take 5 times the damage of the stack, which I think is super cool. I will take this thing sometimes. There's a lot of mutations here. I feel like I'm trying to alphabetize these. I will take it sometimes, like I mentioned. It will work with Crow's Foot. It will work with Tactical Retreat. If you take this with just a regular ice bow or an ice grenade, you will find that enemies will die. It's wild. So it won't be immediate, right? But you can shoot an ice bow, which generally doesn't do a lot of damage. It will instantly apply freeze, which will be 5 stacks of slow. The enemy's going to take a lot of damage, and it's going to, in a second or two, it's going to disappear. So, I don't tend to take this with the things that I just mentioned. I do take it more with ice grenade, ice bow, ice crossbow, like stuff like that, because I really enjoy using ice with Frostbite. So. And then Dead Inside is, let me find Dead Inside. Dead Inside is another, look at this. Dead Inside is another mutation that I feel like Evil Empire and Motion Twinges haven't been able to lock in, right? So originally it just gave you 30% extra health. Then it got changed so that way it gives you 50% extra health, but when you ate food, it couldn't heal. And then before the malaise was reworked, it would let you get more malaise. Then they changed it so that way it is no longer unlocked by default. It actually drops from an enemy on 4+ BC, which is kind of strange. Then they changed it so food items will heal, but only half as effective. And then they made it the exact opposite, where now it's like they doubled the HP increase, and now they made it so things don't heal. Like, it's so strange. It is so strange, right? So Dead Inside is like, if you're a musician, you're going to understand this reference. Dead Inside is like that song or that riff that no matter what you do to it, it's not going to fit somewhere. It doesn't feel like it fits in this song. So you take it from electric guitar and you make it acoustic guitar. So you try to put it somewhere else, and then it doesn't fit over there. So then you add some piano. It just doesn't fit, right? Back in the day when Necromancy, before Necro got nerfed, and before Dead Inside got nerfed, you could take this to effectively increase your health by 50%. And then you could take Necro, so that way you could always get extra healing. And then when malaise was inflicted by hits, you'd be able to take 15 hits instead of 10. Excuse me. It was that was like the go-to build, right? But now it's just sort of like, what do we do with this thing? Okay. I rarely take it, but there is a use for this. Okay. So since it prevents healing, right? Food's not going to help. Flasks aren't going to help. If you are going into a boss, you have no flasks, and you are taking you have any color and you need health, take Dead Inside, because it's almost like this is like the last chance. This is like your last effort, right? Where if you're running out of stuff to do and you're just like, man, I have no flasks, I can't do anything, but I only have 40% health, take Dead Inside so that way you have more health. It might let you get through that boss fight, right? It might get you through the boss fight so you can then re-roll and take Gastronomy in the next level, like whatever. That is the only situation, in my opinion, this is the only situation in which Dead Inside is useful, right? Like I said, they've been trying to figure this out for, oh my God, 1.1 I think was like what, early 2018? Yeah, so it was late 2018. So they've been trying to figure this out for like 4.5 years, and it's still just feels, just feels like hasn't locked in. So if you are in dire straits going into a boss fight with no flasks, take Dead Inside. Otherwise, I can't really justify it. I don't know if you can either. But if you can, please let me know. Alienation and Acceptance are sorry, Acceptance and Alienation, whatever, right? Like the curse twins here. So Alienation will allow you to heal as you reduce a curse, but it will increase the amount of enemies that you need to break a curse, right? So what that means is that if you have your normal curse is 10 enemies. If you have Alienation, it's going to pump that to 15 enemies. But whenever you kill an enemy, you're going to heal by 5%. So that means, what is that, 5 and 15? Is that 75%? Yeah. Wow. That's pretty nice, right? This was something that, as you saw earlier, I used to take this a lot back in the day because it used to also provide malaise reduction. But now all it does is it will increase the amount of enemies you need to kill, and it will restore health from your curse. Personally, I don't really take this. I don't take this, if at all, because I feel like if I need to heal, right, I'm going to grab some of the other things that I mentioned. Even if I'm off color, I'm going to take Gastro. And the other side of it is that if you are running low on health, you're probably getting hit, right? You're probably getting hit. You're taking damage. I don't know if killing 15 enemies without getting hit is something that is accessible or available at that point, right? So you may find some use out of it. Personally, I don't really take it that often. Its partner here is Acceptance, and it's funny. So I used to think that these were eyes and a frown, and then that these were like happy anime eyes and like a little bit of like a pensive smile. But these are actually scythes. Right? If you look at it on your screen, when you take it like this resolution's a little low. These are actually 2 death sights, which I think is really funny. And I just noticed that several months ago. So for 4 years, I was like, I don't understand why that skull is smiling, right? So what Acceptance does is it will drop the amount of kills you need to reduce a curse, but consuming food will curse you. So each curse chest is going to have you do 5 curses, but if you eat food, it's going to curse you, right? I can see a use case for this where you take it with a survival build with Necromancy because you may not need food as much. The combination of Acceptance and Alienation will remove the Alienation will double the curse to 15, and then the Acceptance will minimize that curse again. That used to be like the move back in the early days, 1-1, 1-2. As is, I don't really take Acceptance. I feel like having the smaller curses is helpful, right? Especially for folks that are not comfortable taking curse chests. But the additive effect of eating food cursing you is not really, in my opinion, not really helpful. So it's not something I vibe with too often. And we have, oh man, we only have 5 left. This is good. So this is Emergency Triage, and Emergency Triage is a mutation that will speed up the amount of time it takes to heal, but it reduces the amount of healing that you get. So instead of taking however long it takes to heal, whatever the animation is, a second, right? 3/4 of a second, whatever, and getting 60%, it almost instantly pops your flask and does 30% of your maximum health. The bonus for this is also you have a shield for 2 seconds. So I find that this is super helpful in those boss fights where you don't really have, if you feel like you don't have a window to heal. So you need to pop something, right? You need to get some health back, but if you stop to heal, you're going to be in trouble. In addition, the extra force field is going to be super helpful in a situation like that too. Like I mentioned earlier, you can pair this with extended healing in order to get more health. You get a faster flask drink, you get more health back, and you get the shield. But just on its own, I think it's really, really useful. I will take this sometimes especially as I'm going in towards a boss fight where I know I'm going to need it. I will take this often in 5BC for the final boss fight, just because I find it very helpful there. But yeah, it's a really nice utility. You get it from the Timekeeper. You get a killer several times. You get a killer 7 times to get it. But yeah, I feel like it's something that I find good utility in. Nice little bonus, right? Nice little cushion. You know, I feel like going along with Disengage and Recovery and Masochist, like these are nice things that you can take to further extend your survivability, right? I'm going to put these 3 mutations together. I think, oh my God, I obviously do not take a lot of these often. I forget the names. I think this is Midas Blood. This is, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. It doesn't matter. We're just going to look together. I know what they do. I just forget what they're called. Right? So there's 3. Here we go. So gold plating, get rich quick, and Midas Blood. So these were all introduced with the bank update. And it gave players a way to increase gold or increase health or whatever it may be. So that way you can kind of like play around with money in a different way. So Midas Blood is the first one that we're going to go through, and you gain gold for all the health that you lose. So it 1.6 points, 1.6 gold for every health you lose, right? So if you lose 100 health, you're going to get 160 gold from it. On higher BCs, you're going to lose more health, which means you're going to get more gold from it. I have taken this on occasion. I feel like there is a very niche build where you will take Face Flask, you will take Midas Blood, and you'll take the Dagger of Prophet. So you use Face Flask to hurt yourself. You take damage, which means you get gold, which means that you can then crit with the Dagger of Prophet. So I've done that before. It's fun, but it takes 3 items or it takes 2 extra items to get a crit. So I feel like it's not really beneficial there. Where it is beneficial is, and this might sound a little bit cheap or whatever, but on earlier BCs, especially 0 BC, where there's a full flask room after every biome, what you can do is if there's if there's spikes or if you're in the distillery with barrels or whatever it is, you can take a ton of damage and heal, right? Heal yourself up. So almost get yourself down to being killed, get a bunch of gold, and then heal. Do the same thing and heal until you're out of flasks. So you're going to get a pile of gold, and then as you go through the transition, you'll be able to get all your flasks back and then do the same thing in the next level. So if you're struggling on early BCs with money and you just want to make a bunch of cash like in a super easy way, like that's a good way to do it. I do not take this often. Like I said, there's a couple of specific uses for it. I will take it with that Dagger of Prophet build. But otherwise, personally, I don't find too much of a use for it. But again, players who are taking a lot of damage or folks that are having issues with gold early on in the game, you might find that this is useful. This one, next up is Get Rich Quick. And what that does is when you have a speed boost, as you kill things, you get extra gold. Pair it with Velocity, super great because you're getting that 10 seconds into 30 seconds. And then the more enemies you kill, the more gold you get, and the more your kill streak extends, and the more your speed boost will extend, right? It's a nice little positive reinforcement cycle that you have there. I take this sometimes because if I am running a velocity build and I do take Swift Sword or whatever it might be, I like it. It's gonna sound silly. I like the noise it makes when you get the extra gold. And I think that it's kind of fun. It's like another little meta again, like another game within a game. Like how fast can I kill these enemies and how much gold can I get? And the fact that you're getting this visual and audio feedback of doing these things, like it makes it exciting to do, right? Overall, not like super useful, but I like taking it sometimes. And then the last one here is gold plating. What gold plating does is you will lose gold instead of health when you're hit. So if you were to take this, again, I kind of feel like this is a tough boss end game sort of thing, right? If you're going into the lighthouse on 4 BC and you get a ton of money and you're worried about losing your run and you don't need the gold, you can take gold plating. So that way, when you get hit, you're going to lose your gold instead of your health. Personally, I rarely take this thing. Again, I feel like there's specific use cases for it, but similar to Dead Inside, I feel like you got to be in a certain spot, right? Because you also don't want to take this, get hit a few times, or hit a trap without Masochist or whatever, and then you lose all your gold, right? And then at that point, it's just saying, okay, well, I saved my life. I extended my run, but now I can't afford anything. I can't afford a food shop. I can't afford a new balance blade. I can't afford whatever, right? So for me, I don't take it often unless I'm in that situation that I just mentioned, you know, at the end of a tough run, going into a boss fight that I struggle with, right? And generally, like, in my opinion, normal path and 5BC path are not too bad. I still struggle with Servants sometimes, and I definitely struggle with Dracula. So I feel like with the alternate biome paths, endgame paths, like this is going to be more useful. But in general, like I said, you definitely don't want to take this early on, tank a bunch of damage, and then realize that you're broke. And then finally is Wish. So Wish is a mutation that you get from Boss Rush, and I think you have to beat the third door. Yeah, you got to beat the third door in Boss Rush on any BC. And it turns the next item that you picked into the legendary version. Similar to how YOLO, when you use it, it sticks up a slot. If you use Wish, and as you can see, it's got two different icons there. This will stay in your mutation slot. You can't roll it off. Wish is really interesting, and they introduced it around the time that they started reworking all of the legendaries to have unique affixes on them, right? So this really opened up the game, so that way if you're looking for a legendary pistol, you can find one. If you're looking for a legendary ice armor, you can find it, right? Yes, you're going to lose your mutation slot, but at the same time, you're going to get that very specific legendary, that very specific item, right? The downside to Wish is you need to make sure that you remember that you have this. Sometimes, and I've done this like once or twice, I will have Wish and I'll be like, all right, I'm going to go into the shop and I'm going to get a flint. I go into the shop and I forget that I have Wish, and I see something shiny. I see something shiny that I want to buy, and I buy it, and it becomes a legendary version of it. And I remember, I'm like, oh crap, I forgot why I had that. I forgot I had it. So you got to be careful with it, right? And also, it doesn't activate things that you've already touched. So you can't take Wish, empty your backpack, and then pick up the item that's in your backpack to become legendary. It's got to be something fresh, something out of a shop, something out of an altar, something that a boss drops, whatever it might be. I do take this sometimes just because it's fun, right? It's fun to kind of like sculpt the run in a certain way. It's fun to kind of take things and know specifically what you want and to work towards it. Because it locks a mutation slot, might not be the best for you. And the other thing too, like I said, you know, please don't forget. If you have this, don't forget that you have it, or else you might end up accidentally you might go to recycle a swarm, and then you accidentally pick it up, and then you have a legendary biters, and that's what you're stuck with, is your mutation slot is locked, right? But it's cool. It's definitely a cool thing. I feel like out of the 3 things that we got from Boss Rush, not counting outfits, we got Wish, we got Taunt, and we got Periglyphs. I feel like Wish is the most interesting and the most useful, followed by Periglyphs, which is really cool, and then Taunt is Taunt, right? Taunt be taunting. So, and that's it. That's what we got. My earlier prediction was incorrect. So as you can see, my always, often, not often, and rarely aren't super different, right? Always and often are the exact same. Rarely and not often are several apart. It looks like the sometimes one, the more ended up here than I thought. I thought I would be a little bit heavier up top and towards the bottom, but I guess not, right? So that's it. I feel like this was, like I mentioned at the beginning, you know, getting into numbers and just talking about stuff. This may have been a little bit drier than my other tier list videos, but it's, you know, it's something that we had to do. We had to get this thing out, and it's worth going over all the statistical stuff so that way you can kind of better plan your runs, right? If you're off color and you're got a brutality build and you got a cleaver, is it worth taking support? Now you know it might be, right? If you are running tactics and you have a parry shield, is it worth taking counterattack? Right now you should probably know that it's not, right? So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this was fun. I think it's wild that the tier list extravaganza is over. I don't know how long this is. I'm sure this took forever. But yeah, this was really interesting for me. If there are mutations here that you don't use that I do use and you want to comment on it, please let me know your thoughts, and vice versa. As I've said in pretty much all of my tier list videos, I love hearing about other people's experiences, so that way I can learn new things or unlearn old things and maybe change my playing style. Someone might hit me up with some acceptance strategies and I'll try using it. It might be something that moves from down here to here, right? Or someone might have some thoughts on Hunter's Instinct that might change. Maybe I should, maybe I'll take that a little bit less and I'll take Ripper more or something like that. Who knows, right? So here we are. So thank you all for listening, for tuning in. Again, I hope this was helpful. I know it was a little bit dry, but a lot of folks have asked for this, and hopefully it delivered, right? As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I do have the Mutations Beginner's Guide coming out alongside this. So if you found this interesting and you want to dig into some more fundamentals, check that out. If you came here from that guide, I hope both of these videos were helpful for you. As I've said before, I read every comment that I see. So if anybody needs help, if anybody wants to chat about any of these things or share their thoughts, definitely leave a comment below. If I feel like if there's nothing that requires a response but acknowledgement, I'll show you a heart. But if you have questions and stuff like that, I'm happy to comment back and forth, and we can get a conversation going, right? On that note, I'm going to finish packing my suitcase. I'm going to make some dinner and I'm going to clean this place up, right? I got to be out of here in less than 2 days. So life's moving. Things are happening. This video, as I said, it's probably going to be coming up in mid-June. So by the time you are watching this, my life transitions will be over. But for me, they're happening right now. So I hope everybody is well. At this part of the season in this part of the country, in the US, it's starting to get a little bit warmer. Sun's shining a little bit more. So hopefully you're getting some of that extra energy, some of that extra light, and some of those good vibes in your life, right? Signing off, as always, thanks for watching. Good luck out there, and I'll catch you next time.